So we got up to around 40, 41. I'll start with a little review at 37, but I'm going to do a little 10-minute warm up first of some ideas.
Yeah, great. And I've got a new fun intro for you too that will start here right about 11 when people are expecting it to start.
Great. Cook up something fun. That was great. And last time was very popular. I'm grateful. It's all good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you, Dan. We appreciate the interaction and the conversation for sure.
Yeah. So in the intro, I'm going to try to describe what it means to inhabit the array. That's the intro.
Beautiful.
Actually. Walk on water, see God.
Telling us we can all be Jesus?
That's the idea, actually. Exactly.
I completely agree. Christ in you and you in Christ. They talk about it in the scriptures, and it goes over a lot of people's heads.
Yeah, exactly. And I might need to take a pee break every 45 minutes. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, just let us know. And and I knew anytime people are asking your question, you're so gracious and kind that you'll stay engaged even if you feel like you need to take a break. So please don't feel bad interrupting or just saying you need to take a break. Not a problem.
Right. And I think it is good to at least every half hour or more alternate with Q&A. The Q&A was great, so all good.
Yeah, no, great. Whenever you want to enter that, just let us know, give us heads up on that, and we'll definitely jump into that. I know everybody's more than happy to have conversation and interaction with you and also to learn. So I think I really appreciate that too. I mean, not everybody does such interactive Q&A, and yeah, it's a really great part of these engagements.
You guys had some of the most sophisticated Q&A questions I've ever had. It was wonderful. It was colorful.
Yeah, we have a broad spectrum here too. I think there's quite a few of us that are self-taught. I mean, I don't think many of us have come through institutional dynamics at all. There's a few, but not many of us, and so it's really cool to have such self-educated questions from just connecting through community on research and be able to engage with some of you and have a comment made like that. I know that's people probably really appreciate that for sure.
Great. Okay, so we're getting close to the time now, right?
We sure are. I'll take a comment here from Somatic Jewel. Her name is Jane, but Somatic Jewel is the account. Go for it, Jane.
Hi, good afternoon, you guys. I'm very excited that Dan is back. I'm not going to be able to make the spaces. I am in New York City exploring. But I wanted to pop in before class and welcome Dan again. And I see two fans in the chat. Or not even in the chat, he's actually in the spaces. So I'm looking forward to the playback after the course. And then I wanted to throw out to Dan, maybe in the future, what do you think about a physics with Rumi kind of an idea? Like, do you think that would be fun if we went through the physics of Rumi?
The Sufi day.
Right, like all about the Sufi and love and the motion and all those things. Is that like something worthwhile to just go through the physics of Rumi, maybe?
I was raised with the Sufi. In fact, our fifth slide today is about the Sufis, but we can have some fun. Either way, and if other people want to, but I'm open to part of that anyway. It sounds like fun.
It does. All right. So then, next time I will bring some questions with some of, my favorite Rumi thoughts, and we'll see if we can pair them with some physics thoughts. So that's all I wanted to say, and just welcome. And I will catch up on the spaces later this afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye, Jean. All right, we'll use that as perfect transition since we're just about to hit 11 o'clock a.m. here in CST I'll begin the official intro, Dan, and at the end of this, we'll turn it over to you.
Great.
All right. Gear up, implosive cosmic crew, because Dan Winter is back to further unravel how the universe and its secrets work with a mind-bending twist. Part 1, he flipped our minds upside down, spinning tales of a fractal party where gravity's a warm embrace and atoms dance to a golden ratio tune. We were left buzzing like curious quarks, and now Part 2 is ready to ramp up the fun. Dan stitching dry science for a universe that's a galactic marvel. Picture planets juggling orbits, stars trading golden glances, and black holes swaying to a negentropic rhythm. As Dan himself says, the fractal field nature of the universe is the cause of gravity and the key to life force itself. So could reality be a swirling web of consciousness? Does your pet rock know life's mysteries? He's nodding yes, with cosmic flair and a sly grin. This X space is about to get livelier than a pulsing hum of neutrinos. So bring your boldest curiosities, like Dan, could my toaster tap into the negentropic cosmic flow? He's the fractal spinning master who turns dry physics into a phi ratio dubstep symphony, and we're hooked. Dan Winter, the universe teasing pro. My question to you, sir, is what is the wildest gem the cosmos has tossed your way since last time?
Well, I thought that was great. The magic lady who just says we need to talk about Rumi and the Sufis. I like that. In fact, I'm going to jump ahead on that suggestion. And in terms of the best cosmic gem, my favorite Sufi koan is, only love bends the light. Therefore, only love creates. And so the challenge is, how would you teach that in a physics class? And actually, so everybody knows the slides today are the same link, phyre.com/gain energy collapse. The link is there. The link is on the, so everybody sees the links to the slides. And we got up to about slide 40 roughly last time. And we're going to go through this quickly and playfully. But I just wanted to point out, slide number 43 is specifically Sufi. It shows, two golden spirals making an infinite fractal heart within a heart. And above that is a picture of the famous Sufi heart with wings. And on the left is the picture of the famous, my friend Manfred Klein's Sentix work, Touch of the Emotions, where he measured hundreds of thousands of times the shape of the pressure wave of touch. So when you touch someone to say anger versus when you touch someone to say love, and you measure the change in pressure over time, you make a map of the geometry of pressure of emotion in general. And in this case, it's the geometry of pressure of love in particular. So the old joke here is that if your girlfriend says, you don't hug me like my other boyfriend does, and you wish to study this as an academic professional and practice doing the perfect geometrically shaped hug, the practice is as follows. When you squeeze someone's arm and you, for example, if you want to say joy, and you make a map of that pressure over time of that squeeze, and you do that 100,000 times, you will find that the max pressure point in the squeeze that says joy is 1/6 into the duration, versus if you, for example, you squeeze someone's arm and you're saying, I'm angry, actually, the max pressure point will change to 1/7 of duration, which is, by the way, max destructive interference, perfect for chasing money changers out of a temple. However, if you wanted to squeeze your lover who just told you, you don't hug me like my other lover does, and wanted to get it more academically precise, the way you do that is quite simple. The point of max pressure in the squeeze that says, I love you, it actually is tantrically delayed significantly, most delayed in all the maps. Now, these are very elaborately worked out in Manfred Klein's famous book, Touch of the Emotions, Sentix. And the website, my webpage about that is goldenmean.info/touch. Point is that you must wait as you're giving your academically precise administered love hug. You must wait until 0.618 into the duration of that squeeze if you wish your love hug to be precise and academically correct. And in fact, the way you find out if you have administered your academically precise love hug correctly is you administer your love hug and then you step back, wait a second, and say, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? I think that's great, don't you? Because when the max pressure is golden ratio, you induce implosive recursion, embedding, embeddable. I mean, it sounds like Playboy magazine practically. And so now that this applies to all the emotions. They're actually a very precise ratio. And I must say, Manfred Klein's made tens of thousands of measurements and graphs them accurately in his book. However, the concept of converting those measurements to ratio was mine, not his. So it is I who specifically contend academically, as an electrical engineer, that love should be more accurately pronounced lo-fi, long wave phi ratio. Anywho, so now in terms of a gem just handed to us that we need to be roomy today, how do we translate that new information that we just now learned about the actual geometry of love, embeddable implosion, literally, heart within heart? How do we translate into the best Sufi physics we know, which is only love bends the light, therefore only love creates? Well, I contend that that expression is actually precise and accurate quantum physics, because after we learned that golden ratio perfected for fractality is the cause of all centripetal forces, gravity, consciousness, life force, negentropy, all action at a distance, wrongly called entanglement, more correctly called embedding. So if golden ratio is actually the cause of perfected fractality, the cause of perfected compression, that implosion is quite literally the only way to bend the light. Do you get it? And in fact, only after you have then bent the light does the light go in a circle, which is named mass. You rotate charge in a circle, you store the inertia, the only definition of mass. So literally, only love bends the light. Isn't that so fun? Anywho, there was another part of that koan which had to do with inhabiting the array. Now, as I mentioned to Tufan and Aaron, I propose to do a little introduction today before we kind of dance through the slideshow and invite questions. They're the most fun part for me. But and that was my introduction for today's slide navigation is intended to be about, quote, how do you inhabit the array? Now, remember, what we're saying is when a vortex of charge goes down a vortex, there is what's called optimized translation of vorticity, which is how golden ratio is defined in hydrodynamic physics. And that optimized translation of vorticity, literally golden spiral down a cone, side view caduceus. We have many slides about that. We showed them last time. But as that inertia goes down that vortex, the transverse component of that electromagnetic wave is converted efficiently without loss, defining what Einstein called infinite non-destructive charge compression, which is what stumped his life. The reason you could have infinite non-destructive compression is because that's infinite. And as it goes down that vortex, it's converted from transverse to longitudinal, obviously. And anybody who's even taken a glance at Tom Bearden knows that's pretty much the definition of a gravity wave. And it's actually self-evident because the centripetal component of the electromagnetic arriving, for example, at the nucleus, has to be the compressional or longitudinal or scalar component, which could be symmetrically from opposite sides, symmetrically implosively compressing, explaining why the longitudinal nodes of the Earth grid measurably reduce radioactive critical mass, and how the Ark of the Covenant works to non-destructively store the Anunnaki nukes. So, anywho, point being here, once that wave is launched into the more distributable longitudinal compressional wave, wrongly called scalar, then those waves of compression, longitudinal EMF, will pass through about anything, especially Faraday cages and basically anything. However, when they reach the next compressional node in the fractal array, and now I'm holding up, and you can't see it, but I'm holding up the Star Mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit, featured at Tufan's site, geometricmodels.org. And it's dodecacosa, infinite 3D fractal, the only possible three-dimensional fractal. And that is a model of literally proven to be the model of hydrogen, the Earth grid, how DNA works, and it's a model of the masses of the universe, if you believe New Scientist magazine. So, and also Steiner's foundation stone. So that dodeca, basically dodecacosa, obviously the map of all sacred spaces, obviously a map of the geometry of longitudinal arrays in general. Remember, our title of this section is How to Inhabit the Array. Now, I contend to you that inhabiting the array is actually the only serious descriptor of consciousness itself. In other words, okay, I got this array. It's called my synapses. Obviously, it's a hologram, I believe Karl Pribram. And I inhabit that array of spark gaps, Indra's net, as it were, the synapse sparks. And when I inhabit that array, when there's a vortex of liquid crystal charge in the array of synapses in the brain, when that vortex comes to a peak, to a point, and we can measure this because when golden ratio brainwave harmonics focus that liquid crystal vortex inside your head to a point, then and only then do you get lucid dreaming, remote viewing, astral travel, the physics of soul, action at a distance, Jean-Charles Moyen actually teleporting. In summary, and kids seeing without their eyes. So in summary, all the fun stuff starts after you get your brain vortex imploding. And what happens then, which enables you to inhabit the array, is that at that center point, the implosion tuned to Planck. Remember, the brain waves that make this happen, look at flameinmind.com. The brain waves that make this happen, always golden ratio cascade times Planck, perfectly tuned, happens to be also exactly the Schumann cascade. What a coincidence. So when that implosion happens and your vortex inside your head spits out coherently, efficiently, coherent longitudinal EMF directionally, which is how you inhabit the array, you embed in the array. And what happens then is that coherent longitudinal EMF propagates from your body, called the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body. In summary, physicsofsoul.com. So the ability to generate that longitudinal coherence is everything. It's the only way you're going to lucid dream. Remember, the frequencies which cause lucid dreaming, check the university studies, luciddreamteam.com. So that frequency cascade enables the compression, which allows your body to spin up the coherent longitudinal EMF, and therefore inhabit the array, which is the only physics of ancestor memory, collective unconscious, the songline, dreaming track. Aboriginals absolutely understand this. Anywho, so the point I wanted to make was, and we're going to get to the final Sufi part of this, hopefully. The point I wanted to make was that if embedding into that array, when you get compressed, now you know the physics, and I do mean the physics of why, if you got a magnetic line cross, if you got a sunset, if you got implosive phonons, if you got anything that enables implosive compression, this is going to work better. The same way PhiRay.com verify all our plasma devices, and every cathedral, labyrinth, and pyramid on the planet, every single one is at a magnetic line node cross point. The same places that Cozy Rev measured is the only place you can get commercial military quality telepathy. The same places Bruce Cathy measured is the only place you get reduction in nuclear critical mass. Now you know why, because centripetal force is the opposite of radioactivity. Hint, Ark of the Covenant, implosive capacitor. So basically, when you get to a place of successful compression, sometimes called human bliss, sometimes called a sacred site, sometimes called golden ratio and brainwaves, it's all the same thing. It's successful electrical implosive compression. When you get to a node in the array and you what's called impedance match, capacitively couple or embed in that array, what happens? You open your eyes and you wake up and you see that you are inhabiting a larger hologram, literally the nodes in the array. That's why don't try dying or having bliss inside an aluminum box with electrosmog. It's hell, man, literally. So now that we understand the physics, we know why we need to get the hell, get the hell, out of the cities. Sorry. So, I mean, the kids, kids who go to school in the woods. Do you know what the difference is of those kids? It's off the charts. The kids in Finland who go to school without shoes on, read the book Earthing. The difference is off the charts. It's called grounding, embedding. You get the flavor. Anywho, so now that we know what consciousness is, it is the ability to embed in that array. So now you can see why this is the same physics precisely of all lucid dreaming, all astral travel, all portals, all teleportation, all remote viewing. Tony says, oh, you need an obelisk. Well, Tony, I love you, but when you try phi-ray.com, you're going to find it's 1,000 times more powerful than your obelisks. I mean, Nick is seeing at a distance when somebody turns a phi-ray on 1,000 miles away every time. Oh yeah, these nodal arrays, longitudinal, man. Talk about action at a distance. So you get the flavor. Now, I just wanted to have the flavor here that if you really get inside out with this idea of inhabiting the array coherently, you can then begin to plot how you are going to lucid dream and therefore have a soul. You can plot along with our wonderful friend Jake, who might even be here, Astral Urma, who has these astral battles. Well, how do you get power in the astral? You get centripetal. And how do you pick where you're going to precipitate or emanate into the astral? How do you pick your location? What is your coordinate? How are you going to navigate in a lucid dream? If you can't do that, you're not going to be able to steer when you die. Now, when you're outside your body, you are obviously a plasma donut. That's the physics. Now, if you are a plasma donut and you need to go in some particular vector direction, do you know what the index of the spirals that determine the vector direction of your plasma donut when you're dreaming and when you die, the tetracubic index of which spiral points you which direction is called the Hebrew and Sanskrit alphabet? Ain't that cool? goldenmean.info/DNA ring. So obviously, if you want to spit your donut so you can steer your jets, man, so you can steer in a lucid dream and a remote view, you get the flavor. So once you begin to understand what it means to inhabit the plasma toroids navigating in an array, a permissive array. So for example, you could do amazing stuff in astral if you're in the right nature environment. But if you're in the damn metal electrosmog city, there's a lot of barriers. You're going to lose momentum, man. So I'm not, this is not an ad for cities or the National Football League. No, I'm joking. All right. Okay. So the final Sufi conclusion to this section of today's lecture, this intro section, the conclusion of the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end, either way. No, it's very Sufi. It is now that you've studied this with me, you need to be able to figure out this koan. And the koan is as follows. There you were, emerging from the Gurdjieff school. For me, it was claymont.org. And of course, everybody had to watch the film Meetings with Remarkable Men. And in the film Meetings with Remarkable Men, at the very beginning of the film, it is made absolutely clear with a very lengthy dialogue that there you are in the mountains, and the person who is awarded the title saint or lead Sufi or real spiritual master, you know how that person is tested? That person is tested by their ability to make an echo. Now, if you can make a perfect echo, you are called a Sufi saint because, fill in the blank, this is the first question on your physics test today. No. What is a perfect echo? Hello. It's something that can resonate in the array forever. Well, a perfect echo is the name for the distribution of charge that comes from implosive fractal geometry. An example of a perfect echo would actually be Planck. Another perfect echo would be the Schumann harmonic cascade, a golden ratio multiple of Planck, which defines all brainwave activity creating bliss and implosion and defines hydrogen and 200 other physical variables, PLANCKPHIRE.com. That is a perfect echo. You get the flavor? So these Sufis, they were cool. So thank you for bringing up Sufis. So now we were going to do slides, but first, maybe there's questions or dialogue. Shall we?
I've got a question directly relational to that. Is the perfect echo visible in seashells?
No, that's nice. Yes, you know, the Nautilus seashell. I mean, effectively, it's if you are a quantum physicist, it's actually trivial to know that perfect echo is the only name for every wave in physics. Okay, I mean, you know, when you name mathematical relationships like Planck and golden ratio, you're simply naming the geometry of what waves do. And what waves do is called the universe. And obviously, only waves that stand forever actually matter. There's two kinds of matter. Remember, there's matter and doesn't matter. Well, if it don't stand as a wave, it doesn't matter, quite literally. So yeah, I mean, you know, golden ratio Nautiluses would be one of the most beautiful possible examples, almost as beautiful as the fact that the golden ratio is exactly how hydrogen radii are distributed. Yes, perfect echo, precisely.
So in Larry Reed's book, he says the mechanism of origin of mass from energy of confined light is described by noting that a massless photon acquires rest mass when confined in a closed loop reflecting resonator cavity in a moving reference frame.
Yeah, in other words, it rotates. It's just a complicated way of saying it rotates.
It's a very complicated book. The table.
And the only definition of that rotation is the symmetry where the wavelength divides evenly into circumference, called sacred geometry, which is how you use the nests of platonic solids to precisely model how electron shells and nuclear hadrons are built. It's simply a platonic nest, nothing else. And that is what enables charge to rotate and thus store the inertia, which is the only definition of mass. So yes, it's basically charge rotation then defines mass and all creation. And the enabler of that rotation is simply geometry, and I would call that sacred geometry. And further, the period of that rotation is the only way time was invented or defined.
And then last question here before we move on to other people. In the table of phase-locked EM cavity parameters, there are 24 different parameters they have, or Larry Reed writes for basically the origin of inertia. How many parameters are in your origin of inertia?
Well, okay, we're back at my slideshow now. Slide number 38, 39, and 40 are very accurate geometric depictors of, in the case of slide numbers 38, is the geometry of the electron shells. Slide number 39, specifically the SPDF suborbitals, is only a name for a torus, a D is tetracube, and D and F dodecikosa 5, 10 vortex pairs, 10, 14 electrons. So obviously, all electron shells is simply a name for getting your platonics to embed. That's it. And then the next slide, you see that specifically also the geometry of every hadron, proton, and neutron in every nucleus is simply tetracube octa ecosa in the work of chemist Moon, famously, University of Chicago. In other words, electrons or nucleuses, either way, it's simply a nest of platonics. Now you say, what are the descriptors or limitations or definers of what is that geometry? I say the highest definition of what a platonic nest is. We just proved that a platonic nest is literally the atomic table only. There's nothing else but a nest of Plato's solids, and that's all the atomic table ever was. And by the way, then you go to the next slide and you see Kepler's model of planetary orbitals. Oh, it's the same platonic nest. Hello, what does that mean? It means the ultimate descriptor of what a platonic nest enables is the fact that when you put tetracube inside pentadodecikosa, in tetracube, the 7 spin, you get square root of 2. In the pentadodecikosa, infinite nestodecikosa 3D fractal, you only get golden ratio everywhere, 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 everywhere. The x, y, and z coordinate of every vertex in the infinite nest of dodecikosa is only a simple multiple of golden ratio forever. We proved that. Golden mean.info/kit. So I say the highest definition of what enables charge to rotate, namely the atomic table, is only the fact that that golden ratio, which is required to nest Platonic solids, enables charge collapse. So I say when you define the fact that all waves in the whole atomic table are only doing Platonic nests, it's because all waves can either do successful charge collapse or they're dead. So I say to you, the highest description here is enabled charge collapse. The rest is secondary to the primary requirement. And Einstein named that. He said infinite charge collapse is the solution to the unified field. He just didn't happen to know what that was because he didn't know what a fractal was. Anyway, I still think it would be fun to read Reed's work, but I still say that charge collapse is the primary requirement.
And how would
Just to add something to what you just said, Dan, self-similarity and charge collapse are both contained in Kepler's model of both the solar system and the atomic table. When we look at the atoms,
Exactly.
the structuring of the Platonic solids, they create the charge collapse with their geometric intricate relationship with each other, like the electron shells on top of each other.
Exactly.
And that's what creates the gravitational field, the charge collapse effect, similar to the solar system itself. Just wanted to add.
Yeah, they good,
Thank
which
you.
we implied. Perfect. Thank you, Tufan. And that's all the graphics there, slide numbers 38 through 41 today, go into that in great detail. So charge collapse causes not just mass, but causes stable gravity. So if you want your planetary orbital stable, why is golden ratio the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics in the universe? I say that's a smoking gun. Spirosolaris.ca. Next question. Thank you, Tufan.
Yeah, speaking of gravitational field geometry, locked geometry, what's been in the news recently, not news, but has mentioned is the 1927 Science and Invention magazine on the cover, and you have on slide 107, 108, gravitation conquered at last, the Koski-Frost experiment. And what's funny is that the subsequent issue, the September issue, and I'll hopefully could post that in the nest, pretty much says, oops, a hoax. But no, I believe that it's a very valid experiment. And I would like, in your terms, explanation of how that works. Conditioning, you said, inhabiting the ray, conditioning the crystal prior. So if you can just quickly say, the steps and how it, increased 800-fold. So thank you.
Thank you for asking my favorite question. Okay, so wonderful. So we're at slides 107, 108, and 109, in which there is a depiction of Koski-Frost. Now, for this work on Koski-Frost, we do need to credit my old friend Bill Donovan, now Elizabeth, who wrote the book on Koski-Frost, Glimpses of Epiphany, which you can see at fractalfield.com/propulsion. You can download the whole book on Koski-Frost by Bill Donovan, Elizabeth Donovan, Glimpses of Epiphany. And it's wonderful. I will do a short review now. In fact, you can't see me because, you can't see my camera, but I'm holding up in my hand a crystal called firecrystal.com, PHIRE, firecrystal.com. Take a look at the graphics there. You can see the 3D rotation. And by the way, when I hold that crystal in my hand just now, the tingle was so strong that I had to put it down. But it's magic when you use it in the fire ray, by the way. Anywho, no, you asked the right question. So you got this quartz crystal. Now it can be a tuned cube, although in my research now I see the actual geometry of the original fire crystal from Atlantis, which is depicted in the Excelsior central core crystal that makes electrogravitic in the famous Excelsior ship that Elena talks about. You can take the natural quartz geometry, which is six-sided, and the reason for that is very clear. The tetracube, which is SiO2, ratchets up a helix, the z-axis of quartz, which is the definition of why it's piezo, because the asymmetry of the z-axis rotates the tetracube, the charge, up the z-axis, and the phase relationship of that z-axis with respect to the x and y axis. So you take a cube and you look at the cube from the tip tipped up on its tip so that your shadow is a hex. Now you rotate that hex shadow of that cube up a helix. You have now exactly mapped the SiO2 in quartz, and you now should know why and how that quartz became piezoelectric, which is the introduction to the answer to your question, which is how the Koski-Frost crystal made 800 times its weight in gravity. So basically, the reason that quartz is piezo is because, and again, now usually when I have this discussion, I have a camera on me, but visualize now I'm holding a slinky, right? Okay, now the slinky is a model of the z-axis of that quartz, right? In other words, it's the cube is ratcheted up a helix and the shadow is hex. That's called a quartz crystal. Now, if I pull on the ends of that slinky and I make a long motion with my hands, the sides of that slinky are coupled. I do mean coupled to the long motion of the end. So the side gets a little bit skinnier when the ends are pulled apart a lot. So I pull the ends of the slinky apart a lot. That's called the phonon stricture. And the sides of the slinky pull in only a small amount, and that's called the voltage. So these are mechanically coupled. The long wave motion, the phonon, think of it as sound, which is the change of spacing between the top and the bottom of the long slinky, and that is coupled mechanically because of that asymmetrical helix. And by the way, we are now describing the reason your DNA is piezo and the reason bliss exists. So please listen carefully. So the coupled connection between the long wave and the short wave, that's what piezo means. The long wave being the phonon stricture, mechanical pressure, sound, and the short wave meaning the change in voltage. So there's a connection, mechanically coupled connection between the long wave stricture phonon sound and the short wave, the voltage. And that connection between a long wave and a short wave is called, how do you make phone calls to God? I mean, how do you embed in a larger array? I mean, how do you connect big stuff to little stuff? So connecting long waves to short waves is very, very, very important. Anywho, so now you understand the piezo nature of that helix. Now, if you begin to understand what happens if you input, first of all, the crystal has to be tuned dimensionally to resonate at PLANCKPHIRE.com. Yes, you need to retune your crystal to PLANCKPHIRE.com. Guess what we did at FireCrystal.com? We retuned to PLANCKPHIRE.com because that is how charge collapse is optimized. And that's why the cascade of the Schumann harmonics is a perfect phase conjugate pump wave, which is the perfect way to make your brain waves create bliss implode, and the way hydrogen works to make gravity and. It's all about phase conjugate pump waves. So you get your crystal properly tuned. Now you probably have to suspend it in a vacuum. There's a few little things you need to do, right? Now you put a phase conjugate pump wave in there. Think the reason pyramids make global wireless power by being the Hummer, and you got the flavor. They hook up to the Schumann cascade and they hum, and they output coherent longitudinal EMF directionally called globalwirelesspower.com. Anywho, so now you got this phase conjugate pump wave imploding that crystal. This is what they called conditioning. And so this is when the crystal shrank and expanded like to 20 times its original size, got smaller and bigger. It literally changed scale without changing ratio. Hello. And then it made 800 times its own weight in gravity. The reason it made gravity was because the output of the longitudinal coherent EMF vector, compressional wave, remember, longitudinal EMF defines gravity waves, the only component that's actually implosively centripetal enough to make gravity. And so you got this phase conjugate pump wave going in there. You got the thing tuned. And remember, there's all kinds of tricks here about not damping the vibration and tuning that. I mean, it's very colorful. Anyway, I think the US government went to a huge amount of trouble to remove the original publication on Koski-Frost from every university in the country, as Bill Donovan documented, knowing what the cause of gravity is a threat to national security. Oh my, oh my, oh my. It's also how your brain works. Anyway, I consider it hilarious. So yes, this way a crystal can make gravity is highly instructive to how your DNA can make propulsion, and therefore a very useful study. Again, I recommend the book. So the discussion is at PLANCKPHIRE.com, the original book at fractalfield.com/propulsion, and the link is right there on slide number 108. The reason they called it warp. Warp is actually as stupid a word as Einstein's idea that you bent space-time. That's crap. The only thing you bent was the vector of the path of charge.
Suspended in a vacuum is ice relative to this Koski-Frost experiment?
No, suspend. In other words, the place where you mechanically suspend that crystal are done very carefully because you want to touch the crystal in a place where you least dampen the phonon vibrational array. So, for example, magnetic suspension, very optimal pinpoint suspension. You need to study how to prevent the crystal's phonon vibration from being interfered with or damped.
I'm just trying to work out why ice floats on water. I wrote down something like it allows long waves through and holds its short wave connection through the hydrogen bonding with the oxygen.
Well, I'm sure there's 100 ways to talk about it, but I think the simplest way to talk about it is the fact that when water turns to ice, the molecular geometric array becomes more distributed, literally less dense. It's very simple.
Okay. Would you consider that anti-gravity?
No, anti-gravity in my view, there's a lot of ways to use that term, but anti-gravity in my view is best illustrated by how electrogravitics make gravity. For example, why the famous cities above Jupiter are floating, like the insect skeletons that Grebennikov floated on. So the insect skeletons which make gravity, they float. There's two factors. One, the skeleton is a super dielectric, and two, they develop what's called a cavity structure effect because the molecular array of the geometry of the super dielectric within the matrix makes these little Valentine cavities called cavity structure effect, which are in fact capacitively implosive. What's the cavity structure effect? The way they talk about Grebennikov is quite clear. It's implosive capacitance. And if you knew what that was, you wouldn't need Wilhelm Reich's stupid term orgone.
Incredibly interesting. Thank you so much. Lots
You're
to
welcome.
think about. Alex?
Hi, thank you, Chief. And Dan, hi, I'm from a little town of Godalming in Surrey in UK. And last year I went to one of your colleagues, Marcio Amaral in London, to use your Therify machine. And he had with it the John of God, a light machine. I got to say, I've been reading your work for a couple of decades. I'm sorry you had that problem with the legal problem with the fire GIF. I love Victor Schauber, Victor Grebennikov, scalar waves, torsion fields. I wanted just to briefly ask, I'm a member of something called the Scientific and Medical Network, and I think you need more exposure. We try and bridge the avenue between science and spirituality. Might you be interested in being a speaker, a featured speaker sometime? And I just want to thank you for all your contributions. Oh, and yeah, I was so sad when Tom Bearden and Patrick Flanagan and Jerry Decker, I don't know if you know him, all passed away.
Sure. Yes. It's very sad. Yeah. Tom Bearden, he was older and his hygiene, he was so heavy, and Vogel was similar. And yeah, and you're right. It's sad. Thank you. Hey, your comments are very kind. And, Marcio in UK, he was such a sweet guy. And the Therify Center there, kind that you mentioned, and kind of you to invite. And thank you for your kind words. And, as far as teaching is concerned, I am obviously passionate. And if you got a serious, fun audience, I'm always open to sharing, of course. So I'm very open to that. Thank you. Would love to. The next question.
Hey, yeah, thank you, Mr. Winter. We talked last time. I was asking about neutrinos before, but I do have maybe 2 or 3 questions. I might get to pair production and annihilation in a little bit if I could just leave that on the table. Um, but I wondered if we might be able to talk about that phonon structure just a bit, along with plasmas being compressional, and understanding the z-axis as the longitudinal carrier, let's say. Um, I wondered, trying to understand torsion and axes. Say, if I hold my arm at like a 90-degree elbow, my fingers are like a blade pointing to the ceiling, and I tilt that arm around. I know that I'm coming off of that orbit, and I know that that's important for this rotation and angular momentum. And I just wondered if you might, as a kind of primer, be able to describe a little bit about what's happening in this precessional axis, as well as in the equatorial, say, spin generally. And
Right.
then I'd like to get into maybe some of the wave mechanics once we have that.
Just incidentally, I put the very preliminary neutrino paper link at the top here, golden ratio Planck scale model for neutrino oscillations with Greg Calkins and myself. Very preliminary, and more thanks to Greg than me, perhaps, but it's based on my PLANCKPHIRE.com, basically saying that neutrino oscillations, zones of stability, are well predicted by my equation PLANCKPHIRE. And the link is there. And remember, that's preliminary, and thanks to Greg Calkins. So that link is there. Now, regarding the z-axis, and first, I think you're referring to what's called the right-hand screw rule in electromagnetics, that the vector direction of the relationship of the electrical and magnetic. And it's obvious that the electrical and magnetic vectors are just perpendicular relationships to the way charge traverses a toroid. That is the definition of electrical versus magnetic, obviously. And obviously, the right-hand screw rule is very valuable in that sense. But I didn't really say the z-axis of the crystal defines a longitudinal. What I said was that, for example, when you hold the fire crystal, as Vogel did, and you use either your breath as a phase conjugate pump wave, a Mayer wave, 10 seconds, wonderful, or our devices, Piezoefire.com or Fire.com, are ideal for triggering these crystals to spit out a longitudinal wave directionally pointed from the tip of that crystal, which is the z-axis. So it is true that the z-axis is the axis along which the coherent longitudinal EMF output is directional. That is correct. But it isn't quite the same as saying the z-axis defines the longitudinal component, which is, it's more to say that if the helicity of that crystal puts in phase the rotational vector with the more cubic side-to-side vector, the stricture phase relationship between the phonon component and the voltage component called, they are perpendicular, obviously. Then that asymmetry of the helical long axis is the way in which the implosion in that crystal between the phonon and the electric, that implosion then becomes an efficient vortex. And all of our lectures are about that. If you get the vortex geometry correct, visualize piezo water vortex or the piezo mercury vortex with iron doping. The reason they make gravity is quite clear, because the stack becomes correct convert the transverse component to the longitudinal component out the tip implosively and directionally, because they implode through Planck, and there's an efficient translation of vorticity, converting transverse to longitudinal. So when Tony pointed his crystal at his girlfriend's water and she was dramatically healed, he pointed, obviously, the long z-axis tip. And that's the axis from which the directional compressional longitudinal component was projected. And remember, only the compressional component can become centripetal, and that's called healing. So
Yes,
where are we going?
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So I wondered then, what might change the z-axis and its component, and is there some kind of along with compression, a rarefaction that could happen in this. And I was trying to connect it to what we understand of longitudinal waves, or what some people call scalar effects.
Yeah, well, scalar was a lousy term. First of all, the physics uses the term scalar in an entirely different meaning, and it's ridiculously confusing, and it should have never been called scalar. But scalar meant it could change scale without changing ratio, obviously, which only Gola ratio can do efficiently. And the Russians called it torsional merely because it was the rotational component which enabled the vortex to work. The point is, it's the vortex itself which implodes the transverse into the longitudinal. And in the case of that crystal, what that means is the z-axis has to be efficiently tuned in ratio to, hint, PLANCKPHIRE.com, so that charge collapse can implode that vortex out the squirt gun, tuned precisely to its nozzle diameter for squirting longitudinal, named Planck. So
I see. So maybe it's more of just check my understanding that it's like a conversion of this longitudinal field that's centripetally.
Well, the longitudinal wave is not in itself centripetal, but no other kind of wave has any chance of ever getting centripetal other than the longitudinal component. It's obvious. It's simple. Look, if the wave is going up and down like a transverse and it bounces off the center of something, is that going to be a good squeeze? Hell no. No, it's only the compressional component arriving symmetrically from opposing directions that could be the perfect squeeze for a well-designed tomato juicer. And that perfect squeeze, if it's implosive, is named gravity, as Bearden's equation proved longitudinal. So remember, like in the ocean, every wave has an up and down and compressional component. However, which component has more of the inertia stored, either the transverse or the longitudinal, determines whether that wave can implode. And obviously, only the longitudinal component has the potential to implode and be negentropic, called healing. And so you got to squirt these longitudinals from opposing directions, but actually to do it efficiently, you need to get the timing ratios correct to implosion, called PLANCKPHIRE.com, which is simply a name for a caduceus, which, remember, when we first studied they were calling them scalar waves at the time, which is horribly confusing when I lectured for psychotronics for 30 years. But, you touch your piece of copper wire to the ends of to terminals of a battery, and it blows up, and horrible. But if you wind that piece of copper wire into a caduceus, caduceus coil, then the wire does not get hot. But if you point at someone's stomach, they get nausea. Well, we were scratching our heads for 30 years to figure out why. Now we know exactly why, because that implosion created a longitudinal component.
Excellent. Whenever you said time ratios, is that related to beat frequencies, or is that a similar concept?
It's identical concept. So the Planck length and the Planck time codifying each other, and it's precisely a Golan ratio cascade tuned to Planck of Planck length and Planck time, which both need to be symmetrically tuned to that implosion. Use PLANCKPHIRE.com, and you got the equation.
Interesting. So I would be interested if you have any more that you'd like to say about what I've called beat frequencies in that language, just because it's come up in research. And
Beat frequency is simply a name for a heterodyne, and the perfect heterodyne is absolutely PLANCKPHIRE.com, which defines the perfect echo. It is a perfect heterodyne. It's perfect implosion. And obviously, the only definition of the perfect heterodyne that ever existed is golden ratio, because self-similarity perfected, embedding perfected, fractality compression perfected. You can only add and multiply recursively constructively if you use golden ratio. No other heterodyne is sustainable. Hello, the perfect echo. The Sufis knew.
Excellent. That's tremendous. Echoes also, and heterodyning, etc.
It's the same physics. It refers to the same thing.
No, excellent. Very good. And I'm happy. The place I'm coming from is weaving together things, and you've been a great synthesis. And so I have a few more questions from what I've discovered elsewhere to see, how you might. I mentioned pair production and annihilation in this relationship between the conversion of light to mass, or energy to mass rather, but light as an electron. And you're aware, but what I'm interested in is the nature in which these things seem to be bounded together or coupled, or have something like a solitonic, oppositional, perhaps phase conjugate relationship.
Let's take hydrogen as the perfect example. Hydrogen, you got 3 primary radii, exactly golden ratio towards times Planck. Hello, to many significant digits. This is a smoking gun. Hydrogen is a soliton, obviously. It only exists when it gets PLANCKPHIRE fractal. Only. That is the soliton. That is the definition of the perfect heterodyne. That's the definition of how centripetal force and gravity are made. The most primal example of making gravity in the universe is how hydrogen is built. Absolutely. And that is the answer to your question. I would say, wouldn't you?
That seems quite good for that structure. I wonder then maybe a bit more about pair production and annihilation then, just because that seems to be the subcomponents that we're talking about.
If I could read this from Larry Reed's real quick. Electron-positron formation from an energetic photon is due to Faraday rotation and Levi-Civita velocity effects in an intense EM field. Electron-positron pair production yields opposite charge, spin, helicity, chirality, and magnetic moments.
Yeah, I mean, let me just, I'm an electrical engineer, I'm not a physicist, but I'm just going to hazard a guess here. What he's calling electron-positron pair production, wouldn't that be the definition of what's called phase conjugation in optics? Hello? Excuse me? I mean, the perfect pair. How do you conjugate perfect pairs? If you study phase conjugate optics, I mean, not only do you need the longitudinal component to be exactly 180 degrees opposite, out of phase from opposite directions, but if you cascade that, cascade by PLANCKPHIRE.com, suddenly you're making gravity and mass. Hello. I would say, just hazarding a random guess here, I think that would define phase conjugation by Planck and golden ratio. That's a guess.
That's quite good. I just wonder then, what about the so-called photon, quote, self-conjugation? I don't like that. I think there's something else, but they call it self-conjugation for the photon. I wonder what you might make of that as,
if that photon bumped into a phase conjugate mirror, what would you call that? In other words, when we wanted, when we wanted to make phase conjugate microwave, how do you bump it into itself? You design a phase conjugate mirror for microwave. Hello, which is a top secret national security issue, but it's also fun.
Yes, so it wouldn't be a self-conjugate. You would just have there would be another oppositional, and that opposition would be the definition, therefore. And so that's how you could have a positron and electron emitting these gamma rays that are going in different momenta, different direction.
And if you phase conjugate it accurately, that would become negentropic and make time reversal.
Thank you.
Yeah, since we're talking about recursively heterodyning or bringing frequencies together, I mean, this takes it into a slightly separate topic, but I think it's relevant because I know you've spoken it before, Dan, as well, with the different changes in the sun that have been going on, and the different things coming up with the predictions of the sun's output. How is it a personal dynamic? Is it purely a collective dynamic where the species as a whole, because of the morphogenic field, needs to be in its right biratio alignment with what's coming from the sun to be able to implode those things coming from the sun? Or is it an individual dynamic where some may experience a dissonant frequency from the sun, where others may be able to take that frequency and implode it recursively at a pi ratio?
There's 100 places we could take that conversation, but here's one thought. When you embed a longer wave on a short wave, which is to say the next axis of superposed spin rotation, the only definition ever of going to the next dimension, and you can never go past tetracubic 3 axes of spin unless you use golden ratio to do that, which defines going to the next dimension. like how a cube embeds in a pentodeca, 5 cubes. And therefore, planetary orbital dynamics, almost all based on golden ratio, Spira Solaris, CA. So in practical terms, now we know why not only is, Earth year, Venus year, solar year, golden ratio, but these are all golden ratio times Planck exactly times precessional year and galactic year. Hello. And by the way, I want to here officially applaud LostStar.com, Walter Cruttenden, for figuring out that all of physics was stupidly wrong about precession. It ain't 26,000. It's around 24,300. Exactly. Golden ratio is times Planck. Cruttenden is so wonderful. So the point is that the phase relationship to the longer wave to the shorter wave is the only way you can grow up into the next dimension. What that means in practice now, yes, if you align your bliss or your plasma or your Agnihotra or your labyrinth or your cathedral or whatever you got with sunrise, sunset, you get a longer wave. Yes. Now you align that with solstice equinox and you get a longer wave yet. You get still and you embed in a larger array the next dimension. Now, if you do that in phase with precession, remember how they defined the photon cloud in those jokes about how the galactic superwave was going to propel us into the next dimension? They called it the photon cloud. And what's his name? It called this the galactic superwave, Paul Laviolette, which he defined as basically a dust wind. The point was that the phase relationship of the galactic equator to the precessional equator to the solar equator, you nest embed the little one into the bigger one by golden ratio. And then you could grow up and inhabit the bigger array. You could feel, you could then, it's called digitally sample, embed into larger array. So the fact that we have had precession absolutely wrong for all 2,000 years, it means we're pretty damn stupid, actually. But it means we didn't have a clue. And the other thing Walter Cruttenden did that I think is a scream, he shows amazing evidence that the sun around which our sun rotates is Sirius B. Talk about how the little wave got into the bigger wave. Guess what the Anunnaki Empire went to conquer immediately? Sirius B. Guess what the Dogon worshipped? Sirius B. Hello. What's the center of the widening gyre around which the center cannot hold? Anyway, so that was a little poetry. I don't know if I addressed your question, but it was fun.
Not quite, but it was fun, and we definitely went good places on that. We can come back to it. We do have 2 other hands up, but it's up to you, Dan. You want to keep going with this or keep going with your slides and come back to questions in a little bit?
I'm for a few more questions. I'm having so much fun.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Mr. Nobody, you had your hand up for a while.
Thank you. Hi, Daniel. So I have a couple of questions. Let's go from Tesla forward. If you can tell me who some of your, we'll call them mentors or people that you looked up to, that would be question number 1. Question number 2 would be, do you believe that humans currently have the knowledge and ability and are executing time travel technology?
This is a secret. We very carefully had to turn down the gain on FiRe.com. We wanted to avoid time travel. That may sound like a joke, but yeah, I mean, you get time dilation effects anytime you get implosion. And after you know what time is, which was the experience of relative spin rate, you can actually talk about it intelligently instead of this Einstein crap about bent space time. Anywho, so time travel technology started when physics measured time reversal in phase conjugate optics. They at least had a clue, and then they had all these time frame. So if you read the SSP literature, you will find them using all kinds of time travel technologies. And basically, let me give a little clue of what my opinion is about the danger of that. Specifically, we know my Templar friends who were really only enacting Thoth's wisdom, William Buehler, goldenmean.info/Buehler, Buehler, spoke to Thoth every day, and they're telling him how to repair the fabric of time. Example of when the fabric of time got a big hole. Montauk, Philadelphia, man, We got all kinds of parasites wandering into the Earth's orbit because we screwed up the fabric of time, which is specifically the fractality of time. That's why branching into different time corridors is damn dangerous. Well, it's Mari got lost. It's a long story. But point being that those who use time travel technology, and there's very advanced cultures that do pretty much only that, they have the skills. And these are very advanced skills because you use even a little bit of these time travel portal technologies. And if you ain't got your aura together, man, you come back scrambled eggs. It's horrible. In fact, I think that's how Swaru originally kind of lost it. You know, too much time travel, too many portals, man. Every time you go through, you come back a little bit dizzy. And if you do that a bunch, man, no. So yeah, the current science as is practiced on Earth is absolutely childish. But even this idea that, oh, let's build our time travel gizmos when we don't understand the fabric of time, which is simply the fractal nature of the array in general. I give an example. If you have an intense emotion, you can use that as an anchor for time travel, for better or for worse. You know, like how ghosts show up wherever there was an intense emotion. You leave a wrinkle in time. The book by Madeline DeLinkle. So I caution that as we study time travel, don't let's be thinking that, oh, we can wander all over the place and make trouble everywhere. That's why the Galactic Federation, they have their own problems, but they thought it was a huge spread of the disease of the chaos on Earth when all kinds of teams went from Montauk traveling down the time corridors. We were spreading pollution in all directions, and they were upset, man. And they should be. So we start by learning what it takes to lucid dream and to steer in a lucid dream. Jodie Foster is a pretty good example. You know, before we start thinking, oh, we're ready for that time travel stuff. It's seriously. But the physics of what physics in phase conjugate optics called time reversal was basically a name for negentropy. You could only time reverse rusted steel back to unrusted. You could not do the reverse. Think about it.
The mentors. Can you touch on your mentors, please?
Thank you. Actually, we're thinking about doing another little film about when I was kind of a kid. I joke about it. I was the Forrest Gump of the physics of consciousness generation. So I got to the Physics of Consciousness Symposium in Toronto and then at Harvard. And I knew Bill Tiller, Marcel Vogel, Benthoff, Puharich, Bearden, hung out with those guys for years, even Charles Muzes, Fred Wolf, just hung out with all those guys for years. And I lived with Bucky Fuller. Well, I stayed with him in Detroit, and I lived with him in Florence for a couple of weeks, you know. So yeah, the universe went to a heck of a lot of trouble, and I do mean trouble. The universe tried really hard to push me into the right education, you know, and then they had this full scholarship to University of Detroit, and then IBM decided I needed to be their best systems analyst. Man, did I get an education, and I got to be grateful. And my way of being grateful for that education and saying thank you to the universe is I'm here doing my job, which is doing my best to share with you. That's why I'm here, because I'm aware the universe went to a heck of a lot of trouble to push me, who was a lot of trouble, into get the best education planet Earth ever had to offer. And later, when Vincent Bridges insisted my past life was John Dee, a few more pieces fell into place. I don't call that a reincarnation, but I do call it a fragment of soul memory. You know, so there's a lot of pieces. And my relationship with Bearden, and then actually Chris Bird, who gave me the first Antoine Prairie books. I mean, I knew all these guys. Amazing. I lived with Puharich, Charles Muzes. Who's the guy who had a museum of, oh God, did I have fun? Oh, Arthur Young lived at his place. I mean, you know, I don't know. I just simply got lucky, bumped into everybody. And then I traveled around the world for years, Findhorn, caves in Peru and pyramids. And, you know, I don't know. I just somehow ended up being the wild adventurer. You know what was in my head at that time is, it wasn't that I was passionate about teaching. I am now. But at that time, what was in my head was simple. I wanted to understand these guys who are trying to understand consciousness, I knew they were clueless. Somebody had to figure it out. Anyway, that's my humble opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Dan. What a beautiful story, and I appreciate you sharing all that 100%. We have a lot of hands up here. The order that I saw, we have Chris, and then we have The Gathering, and then we have Doomer after that.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Thank you for echoing your love throughout the universe.
Thank you.
My question for
All done
you
with,
is a little bit more
all done with mirrors. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
My question for you is a little bit more practical. I've done some dowsing in the past, and as we talk about longitudinal arrays and nodes, I would like to know if you have any advice for dowsing for the longitudinal arrays.
That's the right question. So our website on that is goldenmean.info/dowsing, and we discuss how to steer tornadoes. And related is the website on rainmaking with dowsing, goldenmean.info/rain, where we have saved villages in Brazil by teaching the kids rainmaking, which they used to spiral the quartz crystals, basically. Clouds love kids. They say, there was a huge fire approaching, and man, they saved the village. Amazing. And the teacher is on the film explaining and thanking us for teaching the kids rainmaking. So anyway, dowsing reflex. We studied this. I knew Z.V. Harvelick, who wrote on this in Mexico, but then American Dowsers Society there in Vermont had fun with them for some years. So instructive here. If you put a small piece of aluminum foil on the right and left temple of your head, just kind of above your ear there, most of the dowsing response goes away. That's been measured. And this tells us that the weak electromagnetic field tuning by the plasma vortex in your head is basically able to pick up a component, the longitudinal component, sensitively only under very specific conditions. So practically, when most people start dowsing, well, first of all, I've taught some dowsing for many years, although I recommend better teachers than me. But as you begin to have more and more bliss, your dowsing becomes much more sensitive. So at first, some people use rods, and that's okay. But I recommend walking very relaxed over what is a strong magnetic line. You walk across it. Your hands are relaxed, just slightly lifted from the sides of your body, very relaxed, and your fingers are hanging relaxed. And now you're walking over a very strong magnetic line. Notice that your fingers start to tingle. Now tune into that and get better at that. Now, at first, I was able to douse, for example, simple water veins, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not an expert, but I am an expert maybe on the theory. But then I was able to douse and situate the building of many labyrinths for rainmaking. I got kind of good at that. But then what I realized? Remember the story about how the beginner dowser who has to move a water vein back into the drilled well when the drilled well missed the water vein. The beginner dowser uses a hammer to do that, which is functional, piezo. You can also use quartz, and you can steer the water vein, magnetic water vein, back into the well. And that's good work, and that's instructive. However, that is for the crude beginner. The advanced dowser will never, ever, ever do that. No, the advanced dowser will always simply talk to that water vein. Now, the physics of what enables you to talk to that water vein is your relationship, which basically is that water vein wants to know if you are going to help steer its waves back into immortality or become shareable. For example, if you can explain to that water vein that there are going to be magic kids, they're going to have bliss if that water vein moves, that water vein is going to move every time. However, if you tell that water vein that you're going to build an aluminum plant that's going to kill half the grid for a mile around, miles around. That water vein is going to say, hell no. So there's a very specific electrical definition of pure intention, which is literally implosion here. By the way, measurable, second order power spectrum, the EKG, pure intention, lie detections, absolutely measurable. And we know why. So the point is, what enabled you to talk to that water vein. Later, I realized, you know, I walk up to this big field and my job has been to find water. And I've done that. Yeah, I'm not a pro, but I can kind of do it. But anyway, what I realized, you walk up to this big field and the people say, well, we need to find water over there. And there's this huge field in front of you. And you're thinking, oh, do I have to walk a crisscross grid over this whole thing? I'm going to be old. No, I realized very quickly that I can relax, stand in front of that field and ask inside, relaxed intuitively, a simple question. Where is the magnetic line cross and where is the water? And absolutely every single time, even if it's a quarter mile away, my inner voice will say, over there. I walk over there, boom, and my hair stands up every time. So eventually, the more you have access to bliss, the more you can have that conversation with the longitudinal array, saving you a lot of time. So that's an introduction. Was there more to your question?
Well, I'm still taking that in. That's beautiful. What kind of, like, if I would, I'm really familiar with like your tingling aspect. I've worked with some ion and crystal, and I know that feeling that it's like a spark going off in your blood system or something like.
Yep, exactly. And the more you've had bliss, the more you're sensitive to that. Absolutely, yes.
Yes, and the hair standing up. I use that as a direction.
Great.
What comes to me when you're talking about the aluminum, I often put. I'm in northern Canada. I often use crystals in my toque, like as when you fold your toque up, or your, I don't know if you guys call it a toque over there, but you like your winter hat. So I would ask that, is there an opposite to the aluminum? Like, I find that when I put citron crystals on my temple points, it definitely changes my reception of consciousness. And would there be anything that I could amplify myself with when it comes down to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So remember, the ancient shaman, if he needs to increase his embedding in the array for dowsing or 100 different purposes, you often see that shaman, he would hold a small animal, one on each side of his head, and then he would be more sensitive. Of course, holding your lover there could work very well as well. But the physics is actually that phase conjugation living plasma does have critical mass. So that if you get an array of persons, or in the case of the shaman, he's simply holding like a little baby rabbit on each side of his head and each side of his temples, man, does that tune him up. It's very simple because it's extending the array into greater embeddability. That's why literally human bliss has critical mass, and the dowsing sensitivity has critical mass for sure. So you're right. Something opposite to the aluminum would be something alive and living and possibly even loving. Now you hold them on both sides of your temple, like your favorite lovers, or, you know, suddenly you're building an array, man. It's fun.
Would you, I'm a mycologist by trade. Would you consider a mushroom a living animal?
Yes. Now, you know, I'm thinking of Castaneda saying, the first time you go to the mushroom, you think you're seeing through it. But the second time you go, you realize it is seeing through you. And I'm not saying either is good or bad, but it is whoever is more centripetal that is actually doing the seeing. So asking the mushroom, whose mycelial spore array is probably intergalactic, you know, and you definitely could use that as an organ of perception, no problem. But thinking that you're seeing through it and not that it is seeing through you is quite a tricky thing. And that's why there's all this hygiene bit about negotiating from the place of power. And, you know.
Thank you, Dan.
Wow,
you.
I've got to say that this last even 20 minutes has been probably some of my favorite interactions with you, Dan. The things you shared, so beautiful and just so well articulated. Great questions, guys, and this is fantastic. We've got the gathering up next, then Doomer.
Well, Dan, thank you. So this is the first time I heard about you. And so I need to break it down like a fifth grader. So I am from the Interplanetary Confederation, and Alina Deneen just contacted me. And the reason why is I found the golden blood girl who will represent Sophia. So I come in the place of Sophia. She comes first before Sananda comes. So I'm here to gather the physics from you. So if you could break it down to a fifth grader, I have a lot of questions, but I'll just start with this first one. How does the Galactic Federation understand and use fractal charge collapse, PLANCKPHIRE, for interstellar travel and consciousness expansion?
Well, when Elena Denon asked her friend Dan Willis to explain fire crystals, and he used a Fibonacci cascade 1 hertz off of the actual equation, and then denied the equation, and then he asks Thorhan's brother, Jenhan, what a longitudinal wave is, and he basically said, oh, it's too complicated, I'm not going to tell you, even though it's the physics of everything. I realized there was some little limitations to their physics lessons over there. I do recommend that you study Marie at swaruofficial.com. I'm sorry, YouTube channel Swaru Official, indicating that the controversies within the Galactic Federation are unfortunately not well explained by Elena. I love Elena, wonderful work and very useful, but there's a lot more to the Federation's politics that are being kept from us for a variety of reasons, some of which are not so good. But if you check
Exactly.
out, and we do have a film coming up. I'm working with Astral Urma, who is doing elaborate astral conflict with for Marie and the Swaru lineage, and has issues with the Federation. And you see that obviously anything as big as the Federation has a lot more controversy within it than Elena has explained. And I think it's good to listen to both sides of that story. But the point I wanted to make was I was teaching charge collapse, and I was teaching how fire crystals use charge collapse to make 0-point energy and energy at a distance. And Elena's partner, Dan Willis, specifically prevented people from learning the simple physics that charge collapse is how firecrystal.com, PHIRE, firecrystal.com works. And so I have some problems with their ability to teach physics, actually. And I love Elena, but when she tries to teach physics, it gets pretty messy.
So I could use your help because I'm here with the Mary Magdalene line. So Mary was immaculately conceived just like Jesus. She is his twin flame. It's called Hieros Gamos. So I'm here as a stand-in for Mary and the Magdalene line. So if you have any connection with the Templars, will you let them know that we're here now? I have her blood card to prove that she is RAB negative, RH negative, O null. Alina says that she also is AB negative null. I don't know because I haven't seen her blood card, but I do have my partner, my other Sophia, with me. So they call me Zovia Zomai, and I'm so excited. I'll let other people talk. I'll connect with you somehow, some way, if you can connect with me, because your message needs to get out to the masses. And we're here. We're gathering 144,000 at the pyramids, and we're going to change the energetic force there. So we're getting ready. We're using Metatron's cube, and we're using Robert Edward Grant as a decipher for someone like me because I can understand him.
Well, that's great. Just one little passing comment. You remember when Michael Tsarian said that virgin birth was a name for when Anunnaki had sex with the humans. Actually, the Tegotan Pleiadians call it parthenogenesis. But studying the physics of there, you realize that it is, in fact, implosive capacitance, which dimples the egg, defining fertilization, actually bliss. And the Tegotan Pleiadians here, which is the Mari group, Swaru Official, commonly use parthenogenesis, So describing the relationship that gave birth to Jesus as virgin birth, if you investigate the deeper historical context, which obviously that's gotten played in, remember what was called the Jesus line is clearly, literally the descendants of Thoth, which defines the Grail bloodline. That's, they planned Jesus's birth 300 years if you read Secret Places of the Lion. And this was a Syrian concept of how to incarnate Avatar, Syrian cross. And so what we're calling the Grail line, which is implosion in the blood, and Lawrence Gardner got all of that correct, except the ET part of that message. But who they call Thoth, Tahuti, line of David, Grail in the blood was simply the implosion in DNA, which enabled bliss. And the biggest part of that whole story about the sacred bloodline is those who had access to bliss, truly. Anyway, so conversation to be continued. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much. And just one last thing. So I'm in the order of Melchizedek, and we put Melchizedek and Thoth together, and then they've led me to PTAH now. So that's where I'm going.
Yeah, the Ptah line is a name for the relation, the bloodline of Enki Thoth. So that works. And Melchizedek actually originally meant Mag Zedek. Tak was a name for Orion. Mag was a name for the Orion queen Mag. And half the bloodline of one half of that family was the fact that Enlil Yahweh was half Draco, and they call them the Orion queen Mag. But the Mag Zedek is a bloodline cross. And if you decrypt the term Ebi Uru, Hebrew, it means crossing over of the Ebi, the bird tribe, with the Uru, dragon tribe. And anyway, there's a whole fun story there. To be continued. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
I just want to, before we go to Doomer here, I just want to comment for people who may be having cognitive dissonance with some of the topics that have come up recently. To me, in my 20 years of engagement with all these topics, these are all one and the same. I think we have a lot of cognitive dissonance come over, separating materialism from the metaphysical and from our ancient history realities. A lot of history that has been concealed from us, Library of Alexandria for one, but many concealed and destroyed connections with history. And I think all these explorations, as Dan articulates so well, and sounds like the gathering as well, a lot of these are connected from our own inner bliss, as Dan calls it, and our own intuitive knowingness, and being able to connect with these realities, the Akashic records, and be able to parse the nuances and communicate practically. And so I'm very grateful, Dan, for you to be able to, as I've said before, to connect all these threads and articulate all of them. And so this conversation is definitely very, very welcome in the space.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. And thanks for really fun questions, all of you. Thank you.
Go ahead, Doomer.
Hey, Dan, Chief Dinger, Aaron, thank you for hosting the space. Part 2 is amazing. I hope this just continues every single week until we have the pole shift that kills all of us. So I have 2 questions. We've got hands, and I want to be respectful of time. So feel free to abridge your answer to either of the 2. I'm going to give you both all at once. One question is, what is the most minimum viable experiment that we could make with just stuff that we already have, that any human can acquire, to prove this forbidden science? And why the fuck hasn't that happened? That's one question. Second one is, because I just tuned in the last half hour, 45 minutes maybe, in the most simple, Sesame Street way, can you explain the role of Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, in your understanding of gravitics, why it's so central? The reason why I ask is because if you ever look up the guy named Jean-Claude Perez, he's like a French bioinformatics person. He took a look at the entire human genome, including the non-coding, the majority of the human genome, and the Fibonacci sequence shows up there and expresses a ton of codes. And the way it shows up is the 6 basic elements of the human gene of biology: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, appear in isotopic proportion, meaning the isotope as they are on Earth, in the relation of in relative Fibonacci sequence throughout the whole genome. So it's kind of extraordinary. And it seems obviously very much engineered, the human genome specifically. But I wanted to know what role the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, plays in the physics of this. This is the first time I've heard this. And then lastly, of course, minimum viable experiment, so we can just put this shit on YouTube and start doing some disclosure.
Well, your question conveys that you care, and I admire, I'm grateful. There's pure intention behind your question, so I like it.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm sure there's 1,000 answers to the most fun experiment. My favorite one actually is, look, the moment you teach a kid how to make alpha in the brainwaves, and then later alpha beta golden ratio cascading, called flameinmind.com, the moment the kid starts to make alpha, that day, a switch changes in their life, man. Suddenly, not only they start seeing without their eyes, and that's the beginning of clairvoyance, they start seeing their ancestors. They have access to bliss. They have access to implosion. They have access to attention. They have access to lucid dreaming. They start to get a soul. I mean, it is the turning point in their life when they learn that simple skill. How do you switch on the alpha, which, by the way, is Schumann, and the alpha Schumann cascade up to beta gamma is exactly Schumann harmonics, called a phase conjugate bump wave. So basically, they're learning how to make a phase conjugate bump wave, implode their brainwaves. So teach kids and everybody how to make that simple alpha cascade in their brainwaves. How do you flip the switch? And by the way, the way they started in Russia, World Without Blindness Project, to get kids primed to start their first blissed experience was they told the kids, imagine yourself in beautiful nature. Now, if the kid can clearly imagine beautiful nature around them, an electrical switch is flipped inside and they get fractal. I mean, they implode. I mean, they get the first golden ratio in brainwaves ever measured on this planet, Korotkov-Mason measurements, and now that became flameinmind.com. Point being,
wait a second. I'm sorry. I have to be that guy. You said that a little bit too quickly. The last sentence, you completely lost me there.
Our friend Konstantin Korotkov was hired by World Without Blindness Project, St. Petersburg, to measure the kids who are learning to see without their eyes. It's done all over the world. Our project, flameinmind.com/outer vision. You see all the measurements. So not only when they start to get the alpha to gamma cascade golden ratio, not only do they start seeing without their eyes, that's the fun part, but then they start seeing their dead grandparents and their parents freak out. That's hilarious. That's the physics of clairvoyance.
So teaching meditative capacity would obviously have a huge subjective effect, but we already have, Ken Wilber showing he can bring down his EEG brainwaves down to like almost zero, at least into the delta realm, and it hasn't changed the world. Is there, can you conceive of a physical experiment that's less subjectively oriented that would prove we've, publicly, academically had our fundamental science wrong?
Well, after years of kundalini, my delta is off the charts, my low frequency cascade, which means hearing ancestors. Basically, it's the physics of clairaudience, but it's a long story. But the point is getting the brain waves down to zero just simply, again, means implosive charge collapse. That's what it is. Now, the other related simple experiment, so I think Burl Payne measured 11 different times that each time over 1 million kids sang the same song together, there was a dramatic decrease in solar flare activity. And the charts on the website, we'll dig out the slide later. But so the sun needs what Earth humans make, which is the centripetal force that enables suns to be born, actually. That's my conclusion to the physics here.
Okay, so you would have some sort of intersubjective experiment that shows the interplay between consciousness and gravitational forces.
There's a critical mass here. When you set up plasma devices, originally Therify, it's now Fire.com, and you do these things at a distance, you turn them on. People have such intense meditation experiences, collective unconscious. My God, it's off the charts. And the only limitation there is you need leadership. Who can steer a collective lucid dream? There's the question. But absolutely, this inhabiting the array, and there's 1,000 experiments. But and what was your second question?
My second one was the as fundamentally, meaning as going down to the particles or whatever. If you can explain, because I missed most of the space.
Golden ratio,
the golden ratio, the role of it, because obviously there's some negentropic role. But if you can break it,
exactly,
teach it to me like I'm 5 and stupid, I would be deeply grateful.
Well, remember, this is the entire book, PLANCKPHIRE.com, #1 Amazon wave mechanics for months, is only about that question, but simple versions as follows. So first of all, Fibonacci is only what nature uses to approximate golden ratio in low numbers, tree branching, for example. So the only actual principle here is golden ratio, and Fibonacci is only the introduction to the principle, which is golden ratio, contrary to Elena's confusion. So what we did at PLANCKPHIRE.com is we published the generalized wave equations which prove, Navier-Stokes, etc., that golden ratio is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference.
Okay, can we stop right there? What does that mean? That
it means if you got a bunch of waves and you don't want them to kill each other, you have to use golden ratio or you're dead. And we proved it.
And you don't want them to kill each other. So obviously,
that's right.
If you want constructive interference, you're talking about a harmonic, but the golden ratio is not an integer difference. So
no. Well, if you express it
in
base, if you express it in base 12, it is. That's the fact that it's a
okay.
transcendental number.
Well, that's kind of a major detail. Or are you saying we've been expressing things? We need to start expressing things in base 12.
The advanced cultures have been telling us that for decades, but anyway.
Right, but here, this is. I mean, that's an asterisk.
Well, no.
That
Cultures
sort of
who
needs to be talked
understand
about.
gravity. Cultures who understand gravity all use base 12 if we believe the Palladians, but that's even trivial. The point is, and here's the point is that golden ratio is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference is because the only permissive way to recursively add and multiply. And when you can recursively constructively add and multiply, you can implode, and therefore compression becomes non-destructive. Einstein named it. Non-destructive compression is a solution to the unified field, except he didn't know what non-destructive compression is. Non-destructive compression is precisely the fractality perfected by golden mean ratio, which allows waves to add and multiply constructively recursively. And then the wavelengths and phase velocities add and multiply recursively constructively, and the phase velocities adding and multiplying constructively is called generating compression. I'm sorry, the phase velocities generate acceleration constructively as the result of the right kind of compression. And that acceleration of charge is named the gravity.
Are you saying that in base 12 at some point the golden ratio becomes a rational number?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. That's what I've been told.
And so in this proportion, we can have constructive interference in a relative golden ratio between two waves. So one wave is a golden ratio of another wave at the frequency.
You can recursively add and multiply infinitely, and it turns out if you tune all that to Planck, you get the solution to 200 at least physical variables, PLANCKPHIRE.com. So it's that's a smoking gun for sure. The golden ratio, the solution to fractality tuned to Planck, is the solution to compression, and that is the solution to every single problem practically in the history of physics and culture. The solution to alchemy, the solution to urban design.
I mean, Dan, why isn't this our experiment and not the psionics one? I mean, this is the experiment. This is the experiment we should be running, not the psionics one. I mean,
well, yeah, if you implode capacitance tuned to PLANCKPHIRE.com, you make energy and you make gravity and you make global wireless power. I mean,
and
it's actually boring and trivial. But sorry, go ahead.
If I may, just real quick, did you not just say you have one of the Millennium Prizes figured out, the Navier-Stokes equations?
We used the Navier-Stokes and what was the other one? It's in our two major published physics papers. Publications are at PLANCKPHIRE.com. We use Navier-Stokes in the generalized wave equations to show if you add and multiply recursively using golden ratio waves on a line, you have the maximum possible constructive interference. And then if you extrapolate that line into 3D, which happens to be the axes of dodecacosa, then that becomes a three-dimensional implosive charge fractal. And we later proved by equation that is precisely how hydrogen is built.
And so then you're saying if we get base 12, we can get phi ratio integers. Would phase conjugation then be twin phi conjectures, twin prime conjectures?
Conjugation of phases is a name for conjugal relations, which is a name for recursive constructive adding and multiplying. That's the definition of conjugation. That's what conjugation is. People who are discovering phase conjugate optics, they already knew that to get light into the body without heat, you use golden ratio. They didn't realize that golden ratio defines perfect optical phase conjugation. In my view, they're kind of idiots.
Wow. So it's just straight up by using base 12, we can get twin phi conjectures. Where
I have to admit, the Pleiadians, actually, like a half a dozen different Pleiadian sources have told me that use base 12 to do that, but I haven't even checked. I'm sorry.
And just to wrap this up, I want to this last question about the golden ratio. The golden ratio, of course, the Fibonacci is approaching phi, but it's doing so successively through addition. What exactly is the multiplication that we're talking about?
Recursive addition is multiplication.
Right.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 5.
So can we make it really concrete? If we have 400 hertz, what's the next step up? Are we multiplying? What's the next constructive phi wave interference that we're doing? Or you can change the number, make it 20 hertz or whatever.
If you look at the chart, there are many of these charts at PLANCKPHIRE.com. One of them is at pyramidwirelesspower.com.
Okay.
So that the actual PLANCKPHIRE.com defines a Schumann harmonic at 7.29 hertz. However, we've discovered on this planet, which Thoth did his best, but he got the Schumann cascade to 7.83 instead of 7.29. But once you know that, then you know the entire frequency cascade that we've measured in every single sacred pyramid, including Sam's in Bosnia, 7.83. And so instead of 50, it was 53. And then he measured 27,900 hertz on the roof. I mean, the whole cascade is golden ratio times Planck, slightly tweaked to the actual Schumann. And once you understand that, you can know exactly how pyramids are making wireless power.
It's the golden ratio times Planck.
Integer exponents of golden ratio times Planck is the definition of PLANCKPHIRE.com.
Okay.
And the definition of charge collapse, which is the definition of the cause of gravity, life force, consciousness, neg entropy, and all action at a distance.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Okay, let's Dan, do you want to take a break here? We've been double the time of the 45 minutes you were looking for.
You're right. I think I need to use the restroom. Give me 3 minutes here.
Absolutely. Take your time.
Let's give him a golden ratio amount of time just to be certain. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Thank you.
Please choose 36 or 9 minutes.
All right. So I know we got 3 other hands. We got Fletcher, Astral, and Tom, and definitely want to get to your guys' questions. When Dan comes back, we'll see if he wants to keep engaging with this. I know he's having a lot of fun, and I think he's directed by fun. So that's great. So we'll let him go, see if he wants to keep going or go into the slides. We got a few minutes here. If anything's on anybody's mind up here on stage, feel free to chime in and chat.
I was just going to ask Nathan, are you recording this too?
Oh, yes. By the way, everyone in the purple pill, which is what we call that oval at the bottom right of the app, you can click that and find in there a link to a YouTube stream, which does have the slides going and the space showing. The audio may not be as great, but I'm given to understand you might be able to just watch on mute and listen over here if you want to try and hack it there.
Yeah, that'd probably be the way to do it for now. It has a slight echo, and we're still working out those kinks for doing the live streams. In post, I'll be able to take that visual. I know, Chief, you got one going too, and so I'll be able to overlay the audio. Sorry. Loud truck in the background. It's Texas. I'll be able to overlay, create a visual with the pure audio from the recording of the space after the fact. And then there's also, if you guys, the nest up there, I know we got a lot of links up there. If you scroll all the way to the right, then we've got a link to the slideshow itself, so you can view that as well. And then also, the slideshow is presented in a software called Keynote. So if you mouse over or just on a phone, touch the left-hand side of that slideshow, it'll bring up an index. So you can actually see all the numbers and easily scroll through all the slides.
I'm wondering, is anybody wondering whether there was some sort of intentional genocide to get rid of polydactyly in the human genome, the six digit, so we don't intuitively come up with a 12-base number system?
I think that's still happening now. I mean, I don't want to ask him directly because I feel like it's rude, but why is Dan Winter alive? And why is he allowed to spread this stuff? And why are we, hearing it from him when everything else seems to be completely controlled and just straight up deadly?
But I do
Yeah.
think, I mean, as a meta to that, I think that, you know, even the dynamics he's talking about metaphysically and other realms, I think there's a lot of additional, some of us come in because of our pre-incarnations, our bloodlines, different dynamics, ways that we engage, that there is interdimensional protection. I think Dan is an example of that. And, you know, many of us, maybe more than we realize, that we are here for such a time as this. And, you know, our oversoul, our soul, and the soul families, soul teams that we're working with, make sure that the nefarious bad actors can only go so far with things they want to do with us.
You
It
nailed
just
that
sucks
for
because
sure.
I'm literally living in an aluminum box right now, and I can't change it.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Well, so is Chris.
Yeah,
too.
me as well.
Yeah. That'll be
It's a little concerning to hear. With all due respect, it is concerning to hear. Oh, your trailer house is deadly. You are gonna lose your soul if you keep living in it.
Well, you know, even if you can try to get out into nature really regularly and do your streaming there and find your famous sacred site, you know, there are many ways to ground.
Well, thank you. That's a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
I guess we were going on your opinion, what you would like to do next, whether we keep going with the slides or keep going with questions.
Well, actually, the questions are more fun for me. You can look at the slides anytime as you like, or what your choice. Your choice.
I think it's beautiful. If you're open to it, Dan, I think you've got so much material online. I've digested your material for the better part of 10 years, and these interactions are just so organic and relevant to like right now. You know, things that are coming up intuitively. It's really beautiful. So yeah, if you're down to keep going, I think we had Fletcher and then Astral and then Tom.
It's fun. It's fun.
Hey man, thanks for the answering of questions. It's really great. Really appreciate it. So I'll try to make this quick because it could be kind of a long story. I explained it long form with a friend the other day, but so I had this experience recently, maybe a few months ago, where I was sitting there relaxed, really, really relaxed, intentionally. You know, I had some things that I wanted to think about, some family members that were sick, and you know, I really wanted to kind of search the universe for some answers. And where I ended up was very surprising to me because I had never studied or seen or really been involved with anything like this. But basically, got really relaxed. I focused on this kind of Mobius ball inside of me in my solar plexus area, and the next thing that I knew, I was like kind of riding on a black hole, event horizon, time stream, like a bunch of time stream stuff. And then I was kind of embodying, like face to face with embodying these entities and communicating that I've only seen in like Vedic statues and things like that. So I'm just trying to figure out what I'm dealing with here. And is it ancestral? What is this stuff?
Well, that sounds like a beautiful experience. And I think we need to see some drawings of what you saw. but no, well, where I've been working on this, for example, I did a bunch of recent films with Dahlia, who is basically, it seems, personally in touch with half the ancient Egyptian pantheon, especially Enki and Thoth, Osiris, and like personal. And I worked with the Templars who were making phone calls to Thoth every day. And if you do the chart on that part of the Anunnaki family, Enki, Thoth, who was Osiris, who was Viracocha, who was Quetzalcoatl, and probably was Shiva, and you know, it's the same family. Or they call it, you know, when Graham Hancock gets finished, and he says every single time the world fell apart, the same exact team walks out of the ocean called Apkallu. And whether you call that, you know, Osiris, whether you call that Thoth, Hermes, Quetzalcoatl, it's always the same guys, a team of 7 called Apkallu, which is the same team that comes to save civilization every single time. It's like the same family. And whether it's Vedic or Christian or Egyptian, it's always the same actual team. So what the heck is this? Is this archetype?
Yeah, I kind of
Actually,
had that feeling. The
yeah.
other feeling that I had, which
Go ahead.
was kind of hard to shake, was like, could these be the planets that are near us? That
Well,
was,
I mean, we think there are tens of thousands of humanoid civilizations in this galactic quadrant alone, and probably billions across the galaxies. I mean, you know, we're a little small here. But whether you take it from Elena Danan's very useful book, The Cedars, or whether you take it from the Aboriginals, or whether you take it from Op Kalu's story, it's all the same story. The galactic civilizations in general have been seeded by very specific teams who have taken it upon themselves. Now, I personally, the way I look at it, I see Thoth, Tahuti, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, pretty much, which is the definition of the line of David and the Grail bloodline, for example, in addition to, you know, almost every other sacred bloodline of every Aboriginal tribe on the planet. It's the same family. Like Padmasambhava melts the stone with his hand. You can put your hand in the stone he melted with his hand. And Sam, Sam, is the name for Enki, if you believe Anton Parks. So point being that this Cedars family, this is archetype for ancient. And you are encountering the ancient family who is custodian of the bloodlines. Actually, at the time, I think they call it Adam Kadmon, which was kind of like the genetic design for the ancient puzzle named Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put an egg, a soul, back together again. The Dracos manipulated the royal lines of Europe for thousands of years. Why? Because they couldn't make a soul. How do you make a soul? There's what we need a recipe for. And that's what the Cedars are about. The physicsofsoul.com, I tried to share the idea that people who have access to bliss can implode, can radiate coherently in the longitudinal. They become centripetal enough. Actually, they do become stars. And the ancient families were trying to teach us that in very practical hygiene terms. And I think you met them, and I think that sounds pretty fabulous. That's my opinion.
yeah, totally, man. It was awesome, but it also seems to be repeatable, and I just haven't dove in head first because I don't want to I want to understand what I'm working with here.
Start a diary. Start drawing pictures. Set your intent before you dream. Start to steer the episodes, man. This is archetype, man. You got a chance at something seriously fun here. I think you inherited something lucky. I'm impressed.
Yeah, thank you. I'll think more about it. Thanks for your perspective on it. I appreciate it.
Blessings.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Fletcher. I'm glad you got to get some feedback from Dan on that. I know you shared that a few times, so that's fantastic. Thanks, Dan. Astral, we got you next, and then Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I just had some questions, but I can ask them in private. But I wanted to say, Fletcher, I was in your, space the other day, and I think you should go head first into this without reservation.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel that way.
We could all
I didn't
benefit.
have any bad vibes from it at all, but
blessings.
I believe that you were in a time of need, reaching out, and your star family answered in a very strong and rare and unique and powerful way that is something to be cherished. So I'm definitely recommend you go ahead forward it. So yeah. I'm gonna pass my turn on to the next person.
All right, beautiful. Yeah, go ahead, Tom, and then
Thank
Chris.
All right, I just need 1 second here. I'm gonna ask a kind of a long-winded physics question, but I wanted to echo, thank you guys for the space. It's amazing, and kind of following in Nate's footsteps here a little bit. Working a little bit on a split octania on unified field theory. You need alternative metric signatures for that. You need multiple Cauchy surfaces for that. You get some interesting algebra geometry. Triality is kind of a key component. Now, if you throw Klein-Kaluza in there, you get the unification of general relativity and electromagnetism. So far, no one's been able to get the right cylinder condition, to get the right particle stack. And the extra scalar is a question. Now, sorry, I ran up the stairs. Now, Science Bob wants us to be a little careful about the coupling mechanism. So we're going to dance around that part. But I think we're in a matrix mechanics, wave mechanics type moment where there may be, multiple mathematical structures for the next generation of physics. Now, the key question is the matter-energy interactions, the pair production, color confinement. Nate, your stuff on the neutrinos the other day. Now, the key thing is the 4D, 5D layer interactions. And that's really about the cylinder conditions and the cyclical nature of the matter-energy interaction. Now, this is where your implosive charge collapse is very interesting, kind of a little bit of a yin-yang going on in there.
Well, not to interrupt, but just to say, octonion basically is a name for tetracubic symmetries. And obviously, which is, when all the ancients saw the Anu, they saw 7 spins outside, which is tetracubic, obviously. But then to complete the process of charge collapse, they saw 5 spins inside. And that Anu they later justified in quantum physics, psi perception of quarks by Phillips. And it is predictive of 3 Anu per quark. And so that's the perfect slip knot. 7 spins outside, tetracubic, octonion, but with 5 spin inside. And my strong intuition here is that the 7 spin symmetries of tetracube, which is octonion, the tetracube will only ever generate square root of 2 ratios, no matter how you accelerate the tetracube to cube octa, etc. However, when you jitterbug that cube octa to icosadodeca, you for the first time produced golden ratio and charge collapse. In fact, it was a model for superconductivity, the jitterbug from cube octa to icosa that I learned personally from Bucky. Now, my intuition is that Kaluza-Klein is the beginning of the turning inside out when the tetracube octonion implodes, turns inside out, and now, for the first time, you have pent symmetries, golden ratio, and implosive charge collapse, which is, in my view, the definition of going to the next dimension, because that is the only way you can superpose the next axes of spin symmetry upon a tetracube. You cannot superpose any other kind of rotation on a tetracube other than tilt that tetracube up 32 degrees, tilt and spin, rotate, blink 5 times, and you have pentodeca, and for the first time, golden ratio, and for the first time, the possibility of an implosive center point. And that is specifically the definition of the matter-energy interface right there, because that made the centripetal force that enabled charge to rotate the only definition of the origin of mass. So charge cannot rotate without a centripetal force. And unfortunately, in current physics, they have no clue of the cause of any centripetal force, which I find shocking. And once you know what causes the centripetal force, named gravity, consciousness, life force, and entropy, phase conjugate charge collapse, then you can answer all the questions.
Well, I love that. That was kind of my second question was, does this dovetail with your approach? So I think that answers that. And I think the key question, just to follow Doomer's approach, is if you want to make progress in the physics, you want to make progress without giving away any stores, right? I think the particle stack and what's the link between the scalar and actually getting the right derivation of the particle stack? I guess my question is, if you get the right derivation of the particle stack, then you're pretty sure the theory's correct.
Symmetry.
Well,
right?
Not to oversimplify here, but we have proven, goldenmean.info/creation, that the electron and nuclear hadron particle stacks are absolutely only a Platonic nest, for sure. That's proven, that's done. Now, the subatomic zoo, you take an extension of that same golden ratio tetraoctacube dodecaecosa infinite 3D fractal called Star Mother Kit, goldenmean.info/kit, and you extend that, unpack it, and you have exactly what's called E8 entirely based on golden ratio, which entirely predict the entire subatomic zoo if you believe Garrett Lisi. Am I done?
Well, let me throw one more at you then. So in I guess this approach, rest mass, I completely agree, is the key question, right? And it's not a real thing. So I think the 4D layer, the scalar of the 4D layer is the surface tension that kind of delivers the rest mass to the zoo we observe. And I think we're actually on the event horizon right now. I think it's a single electron theory. I think it's a black hole electron. And I think the white hole is kind of a sub-Planck scale entity inside the electron, in fact, inside us. And I think each of us has kind of a white hole signature that is in effect our soul.
Well, you know, we're saying the next dimension is only the next superposed rotation, and you can only do that using golden ratio. Tetracube to dodec is the example, which is how the pi suborbital nests specifically in the DF suborbital answer to hundreds of questions in chemistry. And the only definition in this model of event horizon is specifically what happens at Planck, because it is there specifically that the transverse is converted to longitudinal efficiently, not just the origin of gravity waves and DNA radio and the universe. So that is the event horizon, and that's where time travel and portals become dangerous to your soul, because you can get fractionated if you're not focused at that level. So there's a lot to that conversation. But in short summary here, the amount of mass is never greater than the amount of centripetal force you generated. So if you did not implode through Planck to make centripetal force, named gravity, you absolutely cannot stay in rotation, the definition of mass.
Wow.
So until you know the cause of centripetal force, all of the above conversations are plain stupid.
I was trying to figure out mass to understand for myself, and I kept coming back to this idea of like buoyancy and drift.
No, it's stored inertia. You measure the amount of inertia charge stores by rotating, and you name that mass. But how can the charge remain going in a circle unless something is imploding centripetally to hold it in that circle? So until you define the cause of the centripetal force, you have no clue of the cause of mass.
Would you admit, though, Dan, it's possible it's like a Cauchy surface wide resonance, kind of like a cosmic microwave background radiation, that non-zero 0-point energy might be kind of a universal factor?
And the surface tension connector is specifically PLANCKPHIRE.com. That's what connects the surfaces. Absolutely. Because it's that tuned implosion through Planck that connects all surfaces everywhere. I mean, Planck is the same for 1 billion light years in all direction. Ask why, and the answer is not the Big Bang. It's because that's how gravity is stabilized and maintained.
And that's what they label as the cosmic microwave radiation.
Exactly, all tuned to Planck by golden ratio.
Wow.
But I think we should still listen to Doomer. You want to kind of make concrete, tangible, scientific progress, and watch your 6, Dan. Thank you again.
You want to be
Implode,
disruptive
charge,
and
you make
explosive,
magic.
right, Dan? Like at this point, you want to smash the glass, or am I wrong?
Well, I mean, we demonstrated peaceuniversity.net prove that if you know the cause of negentropy, not only do you know why Gaia is negentropic, golden ratio, Schumann, phase conjugate pump wave, but then you know the definition of all peacemaking.
So if I have dreams of building UFOs after I build over unity light bulbs, am I in big trouble?
Learn how a charged vortex makes gravity. You will know how it makes energy too.
Like a pulse method, yeah.
Well, it's very simple. When the charged vortex, whether it's piezo water for Schauberger or iron powder doped mercury for Nazi Belhanabu, the charged vortex implodes at the right angle. It spits out longitudinal in one direction. That implosion is a source of energy and gravity. And that is, by the way, the best way to learn how to build that actually would be to study the human heart muscle, for example. 7 layers, exactly the phase angle of tetra symmetry axes.
The Meyer wave.
Well, the Mayer wave, 0.1
Mayer.
hertz, is golden ratio times Planck, exactly. And it's the center point of the LF component of HRV and the breath harmonics that cause the sacrocranial, which causes kundalini and bliss.
So did you start with like your source being the human body? That's what you ratio everything from?
I learned the physics of kundalini when I had intense kundalini for many years and still do in Bentov's lab. And we were using capacitive accelerometrics to measure the spine liquid pump in phase with the brain liquids and realized that kundalini was not insanity. It was literally charge collapse implosion and teachable by equation and actually a way to touch the array, actually. So I learned absolutely the physics of bliss. I very humbly claim to be this planet's leading teacher of the physics of kundalini, documentary goldenmean.info/kundalini for my work with Bentov in that regard. And that's the Mayer wave in the breath. And the spine liquid pump is a phase conjugate pump wave. And we explained how we measured that in the microwave, replaces every hospital scanner, 1.91 angstroms. It's literally DNA radio symbiotic to the earth grid, phase conjugate to Planck.
Do they say the kundalini energy is feminine because it's capacitive?
Well, everything is capacitive. That's a pretty vague generalization. Femininity refers in general to centripetal versus centrifugal forces in that sense. And kundalini is both. So, the right hemisphere is more centripetal than the left. And so left brain people are less intuitive. Literally, the right left brain vortex are going the opposite direction. And that's the difference between intuitive versus rational people. It's good hydrodynamics.
Awesome.
Maybe
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. Any other thoughts here or questions? Or
Oh, we definitely have plenty of hands up, and plenty of questions, Dan. Not a problem on that. Chris is next.
yeah,
and then
maybe another
go ahead.
Another 20 minutes or so, and then maybe my voice.
By the way,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get
Go ahead.
Weinstein in here. And so if everybody right now can please retweet this space, send it to the lovers and the haters, especially if you have haters, send it to them and tag Weinstein and say, we're waiting for you in here. I think it would be awesome to get a brief Weinstein-Daniel Winter exchange.
Have you ever met Stan Deo?
I've heard of. I looked at it at one point. I don't know if I remember very. Was he the guy that did hydrogen?
Stan Deo, I don't know who he is. He's on YouTube. He's got some
Yeah.
pretty crazy
Yes,
videos.
Stan Deo knew Edward Teller. He worked on he worked on craft levitation devices, creating toroidal fields around them. There's a Bob Lazar conversation on Coast to Coast where he talks about that explicitly. And he
wasn't he involved with Tesla's levitation?
He met with John Trump, I guess.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
Is there something there we don't need to talk about?
The key there is to teach a capacitor to implode. Basically, that's the physics.
He calls it a Lorenz O.
Yeah, it's like when they tried to figure out negative ion wind makes gravity. Is that true electrogravitics, or is that a localized effect? And the difference was, does it work outside the atmosphere? And the answer was, yes, it does.
Holy smokes.
Chris?
Well, the whole conversation's leading me in a I have 3 questions, but I want to save them, but they're all kind of related. I personally have had ankylosing spondylitis, like fusion of the spine going on throughout my life. What are the significance of the spine, like as you're talking about kundalini, and how can I release that stuff? How can
Yeah, I'm not sure I can help you, but there's a short story I'd like to mention. So my closest, most esoteric partner for half a lifetime, Vincent Bridges, died of his spinal fusion, actually. And he was very clear. He had a grandmother who had very intense guilt about her access to bliss and being essentially a witch. And that guilt traveled down the bloodlines, actually. And so if he had gone back correctly to help that ancestor, his grandmother was a saint, but ancient religious guilt propagated very strongly. And remember, that spine bone weld is the electrical opposite of bliss, for sure. I mean, the spine bone literally has to do the snake charmer, or else.
So, as all my hairs stand up, I want to ask you the next question, which would be, what are some of the best meditative practices like that can help people in general? Like myself, I use like Wim Hof style breath work to throw myself into like heavy trance sort of states. And just wondering if you got recommendations around there for everybody in the room. Like it's really helped me become a much calmer, more blissful person. And I'd like to level that up even more.
We love Wim Hof around here. We mention his name every time I jump in the ice cold mountain water. And you know, the deep breathing, yes, but specifically that form of breathing, which should be tuned around the classic Mayer wave 10-second breath, 0.1 hertz, 5 second in, 5 second out, then should become a caduceus cascade of breaths proceeding directly toward that implosive still point. And at the still point, at the climax point, you will experience the kundalini. It's a lightening up the tailbone moment, and you should not stay there any longer than your intuition tells you to, because death by lightning is Daniel Brinkley, you know. You become a superconductor. So a caduceus breath would be one thought in that regard. And the other thought I would have is really the ancient castaneted place of power there, the place of meditation, the time and place. You douse, you find your place of power and your time of power, when and where you can maximally embed in that array. And then the final thought is, if you only think pure principle, pure intention, absolutely shareable wave, distill every memory down to what's shareable for your ancestors, then your hair stands up forever and you never die.
Thank you, sir.
Dan, before we get to other questions, I have one that people definitely asked last time, and it's become quite a controversial dynamic here, at least on X and kind of in the different communities. Ashton Forbes, I posted up in the nest up above a quick video. I don't know if you've seen these videos before, so I cut it to just about, it's only 30 seconds, but if you want to look at that, even while I'm talking here and describing that, you'll see there's two different, as I understand it, two military camera angles. One's thermal, and the other one, I forget the other spectrum it's in. But it shows the plane. There's three orbs that come around the plane, begin to circle around the plane. And
I've seen that film.
Okay,
I've seen
yeah,
that film.
and then disappears in real time. What's your speculation on what's going on there?
Well, you know, they speculated that the military did not want that tech to make it to China, and therefore took the plane to Diego Garcia. And a lot of the SSP experiencers know some of the things going on in Diego Garcia, and it's pretty messy. So that's the speculation. I wouldn't regard that as proof, but it is true that very high-tech plasma orbs could create a bit of a portal. I think that's possible. So I don't claim to be an expert, but I would say that the hypothesis that high-tech plasma orbs could create a bit of a portal makes some sense from what we know of ET technology. And the story is that they were given the wrong tech to China and somebody got really pissed off. So that's the story. I don't tend to do much conspiracy theory, but I think it's given the fact that there's no other evidence of what really happened, you have to consider that. And the physics of how plasma creates a portal is very instructive. And, you know, you have to actually program the coordinates accurately. And as our shaman, like our astral Orma, learn how to precipitate themselves in the astral at the chosen point when they get there in the lucid dream, like how do you program yourself to land at the pyramid in the astral, in the lucid dream? You got to aim. And the coordinates to do that is very sophisticated. And that's how these Stargates portals work. And these plasma orbs, you know, that's the way they do it.
Are you saying it's either a 4-wave mixing or a 3-wave conjugation?
Well, you don't need 4 gadgets to make a portal or a wormhole. You can do it with one, but it has to be a very accurate conjugator. And then to program the entry and exits points accurately. I mean, they got these things that look like little tennis balls that unpack into a shape like a rose. Listen to Mari at Swaru Official, you know, and these portals, they use them for all kinds of messy, secret military things. They set up a little personal portal. They go here and there. And the Tegotan Palladians all know that these things are dangerous, hazardous. They can mess up. So yeah, you can make these little portals, but that don't mean it's safe or dependable. It's actually not good for your soul.
Could you speak just a little more on what the mechanism for making that portal with these plasma orbs might be as seen in the video, or to your mind?
I would prefer to speak about what I have measured. I measured immediately before Jean-Charles Moyen teleported repeatedly with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes. What I measured was off the charts brainwave coherence cascade from alpha to gamma, well tuned to PLANCKPHIRE.com. And then he would see where he was going from in one eye and where he was going to in the other eye. So we know exactly how that portal was made. That was implosive compression focused in the pineal, enabling him to inhabit and port through that array. And he at that time could only go basically to the beach. Guess why? Longitudinal coherence.
Yes, so the coherence with another point is where you focus that implosion.
Yeah, you know, when he was passionate and young, it involved his girlfriend almost every time. But you can see the measurements. flameinmind.com/lucidbrain. There's the measurements. This is very serious physics here. He makes a teleportal, and we know how that works. And these things they call the time frame for the future, there's all these similar phenomena. You basically have a membrane of capacitive implosion through Planck. And how do you steer as you're going through that implosion? Well, even Jodie Foster had to know how to lucid dream, man, in Contact. So my suggestion is practical. Start learning how to lucid dream and navigate in the dream. Good practice.
All right, we've got 3 hands up in about 10 minutes or so, based on what Dan was saying. So if we can keep the questions to just one question and try to keep it brief here, that would be fantastic, guys. And then we've got The Gathering, Doomer, and Jenhara.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Gathering, you're muted, just in case you don't know.
Thanks so much. So I just put this in. So I'm working with the E8 lattice and the quasi crystals. Can you explain how best to use the quasi crystals? I haven't been able to get a hold of them. I trying to figure out with I think they're called quantum theory or something, quantum gravitational lab that did the theory. Can you suggest any way that I can start testing this so that we can show that the quasi crystals are part of it?
I'm not an expert on quasi crystals, but I would have a short comment. E8, you know, they showed it's basically golden ratio based. It's an extension of Star Mother Dodecacosa, and it is a map to most all of the subatomic zoo. And like fire crystals in general, utilization absolutely, according to my hypothesis, would be totally dependent upon an appropriate phase conjugate pump wave. Now, that phase conjugate pump wave looks like a caduceus, tuned to Planck. One primary example that even Vogel figured out, he didn't figure it at all, but was your breath. So if you breathe into a caduceus, phase conjugate, just like a fire crystal, then you can feel that negative ion wind cold breeze coming out the tip. Now, we have far more sophisticated devices for delivering exactly the mathematically precise ideal phase conjugate pump wave to such crystals. And that device would be Piezoelectricity.com. PHIRE, Piezoefire, PHIRE. Piezoefire.com is the ideal, inexpensive way to deliver the perfect piezo-capacitive phase conjugate pump wave program. Is fabulous, powerful, useful with crystals, etc. Or things like FiRe.com or PlasmaFire.com. All of our devices deliver profound phase conjugate pump wave, and you can do that super inexpensively by simply using the world's most powerful bliss binaural beat at flameinmind.com, which if you don't take the brainwave part, just take the bliss binaural, it's like $20 or something. It's a Flame and Sound app at flameinmind.com. So you can deliver the perfect phase conjugate pump wave. And that has to be, according to my theory, the ideal way to deliver, to trigger any of these negentropic crystal devices is a phase conjugate pump wave. That's a hypothesis. I'm not saying I'm an expert on quasi crystals.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. Doomer and then Jinhar.
Yeah, Jinhara was actually before me. Do you mind taking me after?
Oh, yeah. No, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, go ahead, Jinhara.
Thank you guys. I'm not sure if I was, but thank you. Hi Dan or Mr. Winter, rather. I would prefer, just out of respect, pardon me being archaic or conservative in that way. Hi, Mr. Winter.
Hi.
Pleased to engage with you and thank you for being here with all of us. It's really something special and we all appreciate it. What I would like to inquire about relates to something that Fletcher had shared, as he is someone that I care about as well, and just in general in terms of the dynamics regarding NHI and human interfacing, given the hidden history of humanity as well as the current status of things on all levels of being, and with specific regard to the hyperdimensional control system, as well as the ongoing suppression of our higher abilities, as well as our altered DNA, and the evolutionary trajectory of the species, with specific regard to interference. So I'm not sure if I got it quite correctly, as I was a bit in and out with cooking as well. So I just wanted to clarify, is your perspective on the Anunnaki that they are assisting humanity, as I've had experience with a being who calls himself Enki, though he did convey that he is known by multiple names and none of them are actually his true name. As well as that, I was shown this sort of lattice in the sky, so that confirms that it wasn't just like military voice to skull interference, but actual NHI. So it was kind of like a holographic blueprint in terms of the dimensional layers of reality creation, and how matter goes through phases of becoming manifest, etc. But I would just like to clarify, is your perspective on the Anunnaki that they are assisting humanity? And then if you could just quickly say, how would you identify truly benevolent beings from malevolent beings being deceptive and misleading? Thank you.
Wow, I really love your question, and I love the tone of your voice, dear. And you are obviously very sensitive. So first of all, we recently made a film, why AI will never ever have a soul, which is specifically that there's no form of AI that can implode living plasma to create the longitudinal coherence called a soul. That doesn't mean that humans are the only way to have a soul, but certainly nothing inside a metal computer is ever ever going to have a soul. As long as we know that, we can use AI intelligently without losing our soul. For example, we can take the damn Bluetooth out of our ears. But more beautifully, I have spent 30 years working on the history of the Anunnaki, starting with the Hopi and then Anton Parks and now Elena, made many films together. My entire work in that regard is at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood, which is my ET history anthology. And specifically, in short summary, the Anak Empire, when the father Anu arrived in this galaxy, he was young and trouble, and he accepted a horrible contract bribed by a Draco queen, paid by owning the largest stargate in this galaxy, the Orion Trapezium. And in return, he had to marry a Draco queen, and that's how Enlil Yahweh was born, half Draco, and that was big trouble, if you believe Elena Denon. Now, our other sources with the Anunnaki say that there's another side of the Draco family, which is that they were rule followers. They were very honor bound. So there's two sides of that story as well. But in general, most people, and I think we would generally agree, the Anak family now is very progressive and has helped the Federation in many ways. And the primary leader of the Anak family is the local Enki, who is also called Ea, Osiris, and 100 different names. He's pretty much a hero in our view, and we have many people who believe they're communicating with him, and we think Elena Denon should not say that she's the only communicator. But anyway, so the Anak family, at the time they were, messing in our galaxy, they caused a lot of trouble because of basically Enlil half Draco, including the Lesser Dryad. The flood was caused by him blowing up the place. But now the Anak have joined the Federation, and they're helping get the Draco out of this galaxy and doing a pretty good job. And so Enki, in our view, is mostly is a hero, and beautiful that you have that communication, and very knowledgeable about living plasma beings that can steer the hearts of planets. Very, very advanced science here. So, I think the early story of Enki is well described by Anton Parks, who also got his connection from Kundalini, but the later story evolves to Elena Denon. But the later story yet now, in our view, is that describing the Galactic Federation as the hero is simplistic because there's a lot of corruption even there. And we recommend looking at what Marie said at Swaru Official YouTube channel, which is basically that some corrupt branches of the Federation has gone way too far in isolating this planet from the interstellar communications because there's a profit, unfortunately. So I recommend looking at Swaru Official to temper some of the things that Elena said about the Federation. But nonetheless, the Anunnaki were and now remain one of the more advanced local civilizations, centered originally in Sirius B, and now they own a lot of galaxies. They're big, and they're very powerful, and they help get the Draco out of here. So for the most part, Anak currently is helpful. But in the early history of our planet, when Enlil half Draco under the name Yahweh was messing, it was an absolute horrible, bloodthirsty disaster. So it depends what epoch of Anunnaki history you're talking about.
On the second part of her question, too, is just, I think, more generalized. How does a person know when they're engaging in these extra dimensional consciousnesses? How does one determine whether it's malevolent or benevolent?
That is absolutely the most important question, and probably the trickiest question. The thing is, most people who think they're channeling are so often misled. It's literally tragic. There has to be a deep soul level connection that fits both intuition and logic, and astral hygiene can never be underestimated. It is critical. And so we believe that most people who think they're channeling beings are actually being misled, and the Greys and Dracos are very, very tricky about misleading humans. It's really, there are messes all over the place. So to actually get these level of connections dependably requires kind of a phone call through your core bliss. You actually have to be very deep inside and at a heart core level and really inspect the lineage from which your inner voice calls. Your inner voice needs to be identified, and that is not simple. It comes under the big subject of astral hygiene. But it sounds to me, dear, I get a very good feeling from the connection you described. And our friend, for example, if you listen to our wonderful friend Dahlia describing, dozens of personal phone calls and encounters with both Enki and Thoth in the 4 or 5 videos we made recently with Dahlia on our video channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, you get a sense of a beautiful, powerful, she is ancient Egyptian personally, and has personal encounters, and it came through intense bliss experience triggered in part by kundalini and therapy or plasma. So once you have really serious personal bliss experience, you can make really important phone calls. So I'm admiring you, my dear.
Wonderful.
Thank you for answering. I won't go. Thank you for responding. I won't say any further due to time, but thank you. I appreciate your response.
Drop me an email, info@fractalfield.com. Love to talk.
And then Doom's next. If I may ask real quick, what's a Vajra?
A Vajra is another name for Poseidon's trident. So a Vajra has a fire crystal at the center, and then a highly pressurized spring-loaded clamp will click at exactly the phase conjugate point in that piezo crystal at the center of the Vajra, and out the ends of that crystal will come a directional plasma longitudinal, exactly like Luke Skywalker's saber, actually. And that was the classic weapon that Enki Poseidon used. And it's precisely the physics, phase conjugate physics of fire crystal and even Koski-Frost. That's at the heart of Vajra, absolutely. And Elena Denon does a reasonable job of describing that with pictures as well, actually.
Before we go to Doomer, I wanted to comment on, I'm in the middle of a 21-day water fast right now. And on day 7, I had a dream that I was engaged with you, and you had a crystal, which, it almost looked like a selenite wand, basically. And there were some other attachments, other crystal things at the end of it. And you were holding it, and you charged it up, and then you touched it to my forehead, and I felt and heard this crack go off. I knew it was from my pineal gland, had this flash of white and golden light. And it was just a really beautiful experience, and just wanted to share that, and maybe even get your comments on fasting, or even just maybe some additional insights on that dynamic.
Oh, beautiful. Well, check PHIRE, firecrystal.com, and see if it looks anything like what you saw. And by the way, every single person who has touched one of those has immediately wanted to get them, and there's like a 2-month wait right now. But they're designed on Atlantis and PLANCKPHIRE.com. And yes, if you can trigger your pineal with such a thing, but you better be ready for lightning. So it's like the same way you prepare for successful death. You need to sort every shareable wave and sort all your emotions before you can really get to the center of that lightning bolt. But as far as fasting, my partner Valerie here is very much involved in the hygiene of fasting. And me with my high metabolism, I haven't been so good at it, but I think it's beautiful. You do need to cleanse, so I admire.
Yeah, and the white and gold flashes that went off, I immediately correlated them too with the white milky substance and the golden honey-like substance that come from the pineal and the pituitary that go down the spine, and that whole physiological process when the moon is in our sun sign, and that death and resurrection process and that internal physiological enhancing dynamic. So it all felt very coherent and just right on track for everything that's going on.
Wow. And, we talk about the source of the sweet dripping at the base of the tongue from the kundalini bonon implosion at the pineal triggering. That's at the kundalini website as well. Beautiful, beautiful. Yes.
Beautiful. Awesome. Go ahead, Doomer. Oh, and then we're still pushing a little over time. Are you good for one more question?
Sure. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Since this might be the last question, I have to kindly, respectfully request, no hard feelings if the answer is no. Would you be willing to follow everybody back speaking on stage We'd love to have you, and we'd love to be able to DM you, and you can just block us if we become an annoyance. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask the question, and or make the request.
Yeah, I'm not very good at using X yet, but I'll get better at it.
Well, if you take a look at our faces, if you just tap on the
Yeah.
face and then you look
Yeah.
at in the top right, you'll see a follow button. And if you follow us back, then we're able to send you a message on X. Because a lot
Oh,
of
I see.
a lot of people here are Gen Z, and we don't know how to email. Like we literally don't know how to find the email inbox. But anyway,
Okay, I'll work on that.
I would
I'll
love
work
that,
on
Dan.
Thank you.
My question is about the Lorenz force. Is there something we're missing here? The Lorenz force, of course, is accepted by conventional science. What's the significance here? Is there something deeper regarding anything that you've talked about? Like, is there a deeper explanation to how the Lorenz force functions, to what's going on with the Lorenz force? Because to me, the Lorenz force is incredibly mysterious. It doesn't make sense, but conventional science accepts it.
And so Lorenz force starts with the idea that the three perpendicular vectors always maintain the same symmetry relationship. Let me see here. Let me just look. So the fact is, I think the confusion about the Lorenz force, and tell me if I'm wrong, the confusion about the Lorenz force is people think of the electric and magnetic vectors as somehow made of different stuff. My view would be that the name for the electric versus magnetic vector is simply a name for the portion of charge which is traveling, say, rotationally around the torus versus centripetally towards center. So they're perpendicular inherently because the charge on the surface of torus has to have balanced charge inertia in each perpendicular axis. And of course, they're coupled so that when you pass a voltage, when you pass a magnetic field near a wire, it will induce the perpendicular field. So the confusion was that Heaviside, by deleting the quaternion component of Maxwell's equations, eliminated the ability to represent rotation, and thus, which in the simplified Maxwell's equations used now, which, as Bearden correctly reported, castrated Maxwell's equations, meaning if you couldn't represent the rotational component, you could never represent how a vortex implodes. So there's no way with Maxwell's equation currently that you can describe the rotation that makes a vortex implosion, because the fourth quaternion element was removed from Maxwell's equations by Heaviside. Now, I think that's a simplification which I got from Bearden, but was that at all helpful?
It was, and I'd like to know from you, do you believe it is the Lorenz force that is keeping the crust locked or bound to the mantle of the Earth?
Well, excuse me, but does physics has any clue of what makes anything centripetal? My impression is they don't. So of course they don't know what holds it together. Not surprising.
Right.
The array is primarily phonon, which stabilizes the magnetic and electric fields, which happen to stabilize in a dodecaecosa. Clearly, the electric geometry of the Earth grid is dodecaecosa for sure. And that is precisely how you make the implosion that makes it centripetal, named stable gravity. That's why they named pyramids planet taming, because you could not stabilize gravity or atmosphere without adjusting the pyramid gravity diodes at the tetrahedral nodes in order to make it centripetal, and therefore gravity stabilizing and atmosphere maintaining.
And I'm not so much asking about the gravitational force exerted upon the crust. I'm more so asking, do you believe that if our magnetosphere, the Earth's geodynamo, that's being generated as it's weakening, do you believe that the forces between the crust and the mantle, the crust is hard, the mantle is gelatinous, and it's sitting on top of liquid, presumably molten iron, I'm asking, do you think that there is going to be a compromise to the fixing of the crust, to the mantle, if the Earth's geodynamo weakens, if our magnetosphere is down at least 30%, if we get to something like 20 or 0, do you see a compromise to the crust on the mantle?
I am one of those who strongly believes that the implication of the weakening of the magnetic pole is a clear indicator of a very high likelihood of within 20 to 30 years of a magnetic pole tilt, which has a very high likelihood of ending civilization. That would be my view, which I think most conventional geobiologists agree, actually. Clearly the physics here has to be that the phonon geometry that stabilizes that implosion, which obviously is phase conjugate PLANCKPHIRE.com, which is what the Schumann resonance were designed to do. And if it ain't centripetal enough, we're in big trouble. Now, the sort of psychological side of this is our phone calls to Thoth regularly, thanks to Dahlia and others, is very clear in this regard. They're saying that this planet is going to be scheduled for recycling relatively soon, unless actually that this is a natural, wonderfully useful phenomena. You know, you do experiments in 10,000 galaxies of seeing if you can seed a civilization, and then you check to see if they're growing up or if need recycling. And the test to see if they're growing up is how many of them got a soul, which right now we are told that at least 3/4 of our humans do not have and have no chance of basically ever having a soul. So in that case, the harvest ain't happening and you need recycling, and it's useful. And I'm speculating here, but what I think what Thoth is meaning, it probably has largely to do with that magnetic pole tilt. And specifically, Thoth said this number of years just happened to fit that 12 to 30 year, 15 to 35 year window. So I think it has to do with that magnetic pole tilt. And absolutely it would destabilize. And absolutely we got to get centripetal or get dead. And I think we need to understand the physics there rather soon.
So whether it is gravitational, magnetic, or Lorenz force, your current scientific understanding is a further diminishing of the magnetosphere will lead to an unlocking of the crust. Your understanding 20 to 30 years away. Is that a fair paraphrasing?
Yes, and remember, I'm not saying whether it is magnetic or phonon. I say magnetic, phonon, electric, gravitational. These are all the name for the same thing, stable charge implosion that requires the understanding of planet taming. And if enough people have a soul, you know, excuse me, but if you have been listening to Thoth lately, you know, this is exactly why Atlantis tipped over. They used fire crystals to deprive people of their freedom, of their inner sacred choice of freedom, and they enslaved them. And when you get enough people that are enslaved, the poles tip over. That's physics.
But what do we do about this from a physics standpoint? We can't just create a bunch of souls, right? Like, unless millennials start having a bunch of kids right now, what is the practical advice here?
If supposing enough kids learned how to have enough bliss to start lucid dreaming, and then collectively they started steering tornadoes, eventually it could get fun. Otherwise, we're toast.
But the number of souls, I mean, if you're saying this event is happening because the proportion of souls is not enough, I mean,
that's right. The harvest ain't happening. The harvest is not happening. That's
I thought harvest is a bad thing. Like, they're coming for the souls.
No.
Harvest is a good thing.
That you planted seeds like sunflower seeds. They grew up, and when kids grow up and have a soul, the local star grows up. Okay, because they become implosive enough to inhabit stars. That's called growing up. And until people learn how to have a soul and stop losing their soul, this planet is toast. That's what we have been informed, and it makes total sense.
That makes sense. So we need to grow up. So thank you very much. I was trying to get a soundbite out of you, but this is good enough for me, Dan. I officially love you. Everybody, if you did not hear that, or if you're too much of a love and lighter, there is credence scientifically to the idea that the crust unlocks with a diminishing magnetosphere.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I think. Oh, yeah. And what do you think of solar forcing? If we experienced micronova, let's say 2.5 years out, that is so extreme that it accelerated the diminishing of the magnetosphere, we might be looking at way less than 20 to 30 years.
Exactly. And just the same way that, you know, 1 million kids reduced the solar flares measured 11 times. Is that a clue? We got to get centripetal or we're dead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. And thanks for the space, Aaron and Chief Dinger.
Thank you. Blessing. Thank you for asking the perfect final question. I like it. Gratitude.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I know Nathaniel's had his hands up. I don't know if you have a final, just kind of conclusive thought, more than the question, just so we could. Dan's already been very gracious and gone over his time by a solid 20 minutes or so. You wanted to
It's
wrap
such a
up?
sweet group. It's a sweet group. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, thank you. I did have a specific question, but I would rather actually pass it to Chris Rotas here, who does fantastic work for the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and it would be very worthwhile. He's connected with Bob Grenier, you know, Mr. Winter. So if I could pass a minute for a comment over to Chris, I would love to have that.
Sure. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. You have to excuse me. It's 4 o'clock in the morning here. I've got up to be a part of this, and it's absolutely incredible to connect with all of you. Thank you, Aaron, and thanks, Dan, for your work. I don't really know what to say. I'm not officially affiliated with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. I guess I've just studied Bob's work, and I've been fortunate enough on this caravan trip around Australia. I sort of had a moment where it all clicked together. I feel like I've got an understanding, and enough of an understanding to do something with it. And as an engineer, I've decided that's what I've got to do. So yeah, I've just been looking for the quickest and cheapest, a bit like what Dinger's talking about, the easiest way to get into this and actually deliver something tangible out of it. And I've decided the Stanley Myers replication is probably the way to go there. I think I've got how he was doing what he was doing with hydrogen, treating the system.
Yeah. Stan Meyer's key frequency, 10,000 hertz, exactly golden ratio to Planck, almost precisely. And that's a clue to our hydrogen project with Canzius. So the frequency RF longitudinal that Canzius used turned out to be also exactly golden ratio to Planck. And that's how the cold water was burning beautifully because it was longitudinal RF, which was PLANCKPHIRE frequency. So the key is obviously you're inducing efficient charge collapse, which is the definition of efficient hydrolysis, obviously based on the geometry of hydrogen, which we now know thanks to my new equations. So Stan Myers was doing phase conjugate 10,000 hertz. It's a phonon geometry, it's simple. And if you learn how Joe Cell did it, it's totally parallel, long story. The point would be here, though, that I think, and you know, when I looked, unfortunately, at Malcolm Bendall, they are achieving some efficiency in combustion. Obviously, they're literally doing nuclear transmutation for sure in some of the byproducts of combustion. Unfortunately, my perception of how Malcolm Bendall started his description of the physics was unfortunately pure crap. I mean, he starts with the melting point of something equals the duration of precession, pure numerology, and he's wrong about the duration of precession anyway. So Malcolm Bendall's physics starting point is absolute crap, and I told him that, these guys. Then so they really did not understand charge collapse. But you know, they're right to say then they did make a toroidal geometry that had literally fusion energy and that did have a component of transmutation. But I don't think they're going to tune that thing correctly until they read PLANCKPHIRE.com. This is my humble opinion.
Yeah, I've got to get my head into your work, Dan. I haven't really understood it a lot until now, but yeah,
our page on phase conjugate hydrogen hydrolysis is fractalfield.com/hydrogen, our Canzius experiments in Melbourne.
And I just want to say, to wrap it up, thank you so much, Dan. You are one of the most important people in the world, in mine and in a lot of other people's opinion. So thank you very much. I hope we can save the world. And I hope, you know, there's so many ways to change things physically and then spiritually too. Stan Meyer not only had the water fuel cell, but he also had a steam resonator.
Yes.
Which would basically end world hunger tomorrow.
Yep, exactly.
So that's something to look into, and we can talk about afterwards. But thank you so much, Dan.
Blessings.
I don't want to take over the space. This is Aaron's workings, but thank you.
Thank you.
I know I speak for everybody when I say that.
I sense pure intention here, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, it's been very beautiful, Dan. I mean, you're just such a wonderful soul, incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly experienced. I know it's just again, I can't say this enough. The merging of you understanding the physics the way you do, and all the websites you've rattled off top of your head. I mean, you've got this all actually tracked, written down. There's so much material for people to go through and dive into. Plus, they're just so interconnected with yourself and with the longitudinal array, embedding yourself in the array, like you talked about earlier, talking into this, and with the other interdimensional intelligences. Earth has been around a very long time, far longer than the last 6,000 years of what most people think is our history. That is a blip on the radar of Earth's history, of our soul history, of the other, I think, species in the galaxies that we interact with. And you do such a wonderful job weaving that all together. We're just incredibly grateful for your time, Dan.
Thank you. Blessings. I honor all of you, and I'm at your service. My job is to teach, and if I do it well, I get to be a shareable wave also. Thank you. Thank you. I care for all your input, and I'm happy to share emails and thoughts and to talk some more. Thank you. Blessings, and good night. My voice is dying now.
Please follow us back, Dan. Thank you so much, man.
Okay. Blessings. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
See
night,
you.
Dan.
See you soon.
Rest well.
This is shareable. Thank you.
Yep.
Bye, Dan.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody. See you. Bye.